You know, I heard the real reason Kyler Murray signed with the Vikings is that if he does a skull chant, he can tell people he's over 6 feet tall. What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 18 team in my preseason power rankings, as today we'll be taking a deep dive into the 2026 Minnesota Vikings. Definitely one of the more fascinating, volatile teams for this upcoming season that I really am excited to break down here today. And by the way, do not go anywhere as this video goes on, because we have yet another excellent interview with Arif Hasan, who joins the Vikings deep dive for... Should have added it up, but I think this is the 7th year of Arif. He's a staple of the Vikings deep dive, and this was, in my opinion, the best interview we've had with Arif yet. A very enjoyable interview you're not going to want to miss at the end of the video. Excited to share that with you guys. But as we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor, please take just a second to hit that like button down below if you enjoyed today's episode. If you've enjoyed this deep dive series, it is a free and easy thing that really helps support my channel. And make sure you're subscribed, of course, so you don't miss any of these deep dives as we lead up to the number 1 team in my power rankings. But as we do in this series, we go through every aspect of the team, through the roster and the coaching staff. And with every segment, we take a look at their offseason changes at that spot and ask the big question: did they get better, worse, or stay the same? And in the case of the Minnesota Vikings coaching staff, no changes at the very top, but definitely some big names on the move, both getting hired out elsewhere with a little bit of brain drain with this highly respected coaching staff. And then, as good organizations and a good head coach like Kevin O'Connell will do, he goes out and finds another talented mind on the market to come in and hopefully supplement some of that brain drain. So the names leaving are a couple of coordinators now that I discussed in previous deep dives. Brian Angelicchio. No one actually told me if I was saying it right in the Steelers deep dive, but he goes to be a part of the offensive coaching staff in Pittsburgh after being the passing game coordinator here. And then Durante Jones, who is being groomed to maybe replace Brian Flores if he ever goes and gets a job somewhere. Durante Jones does leave to take the Washington Commanders job at defensive coordinator. So definitely some talented minds on the way out, but Kevin O'Connell, at least on the offensive side of the ball, did a great job identifying Frank Smith just hanging out there after Miami changes regime there. But when things were going well for Mike McDaniel in Miami, Frank Smith was very high on the list of head coach candidates and is well respected for a lot of the stuff he's done coming through the Kyle Shanahan system and kind of being Mike McDaniel's left-hand man and a big part of their run game design and stuff as well. So he comes in with the title of assistant head coach. No slouch of a hire there with that title, but he's really getting brought in here to bring his ideas to the table in terms of the run game for the most part. So I did still say neutral, especially being able to get Frank Smith. I think that does a good job to counteract some of the brain drain there. Whereas if they didn't find a guy that was as reputable as someone like Frank Smith, maybe it would have been more of like a pause for concern, like a slight downgrade. But obviously you have your core minds in place here as we get into dissecting this coaching staff. You've still got Kevin O'Connell, the head coach, and in charge of this offense, being the offensive guru that he is. And then you, of course, have Brian Flores, who has turned into a remarkable asset for the Vikings as their defensive coordinator, someone that would undoubtedly be a head coach out there. Yet he has an ongoing lawsuit against the NFL for unjust hiring practices that has basically put him at a roadblock against getting a head coach job somewhere. And he's been so good here that teams have started to consider him a little bit more seriously. But it doesn't happen this cycle, and it's very unclear if and when he will get a head coach opportunity. But Brian Flores would be a top half head coach in the NFL tomorrow if he got hired, in my opinion. But is without a doubt a top 3 defensive mind in the league, and you can definitely make the argument. In fact, it's hard to argue against the belief that he has uplifted a defensive roster, not just to be a solid defense, but to be a top 5-ish defense consistently since he got here, with a roster that doesn't come close to being that good. So you really do have one of, if not the best staffs in place here between offensive and defensive minds here. It's you can't go too far down a list of like who has the best coaches before you get to the Minnesota Vikings. And just off the bat, like, I think a lot of people were expecting the Vikings to be revealed already in these power rankings, thinking I'm too high on this team. This is the core reason of why, is what these coaches together bring to the table. I mean, I think a lot of people forget this was still a 9-8 football team, despite the fact that they got some of the worst quarterback play, if not the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL. So like, you really got to kick things off, like advertising this staff and what they bring to the table, and kind of off the bat, just like reminding people of like what the baseline of what we're working with here is, with that vital factor of coaching. Right. But let's start more on the offensive side of things and talk about kind of Kevin O'Connell as the head coach and the offense. And then we'll come back to Brian Flores and talk about some of the things he's done schematically that has made him so accomplished. But right now, as we head into this season, I do have Kevin O'Connell as my 9th overall head coach, which is actually lower than I had him last year. Just some other guys have climbed the ranks a little bit. And last year was the first year, despite all the praise I just had on Kevin O'Connell, last year was the first year where there was at least a little bit of pause on just basically the idea that pretty much everything with Kevin O'Connell has been green lights, amazing, no questions asked. Last year, we did see an offense that struggled to find an identity a lot of, in a lot of points of the season. We saw, what we felt like was this invincible quarterback guru that no matter who you gave him, he was gonna make work. Well, we saw that he wasn't able to uplift a JJ McCarthy. He wasn't necessarily able to pinpoint him as this like draft gem necessarily, or however you want to break that down. We did see Sam Darnold go on and have lots and lots of success, obviously, without Kevin O'Connell, after kind of attributing a lot of Sam Darnold's success to Kevin O'Connell. So there was a little bit of last year where it was like, okay, maybe Kevin O'Connell's a little bit more human, and his rankings maybe aren't necessarily quite as high as I would have had him like last year, but still, to me, the 9th overall head coach, along with highly respectable rankings, still is a pass game coach. There's still a lot more good than bad on his resume in terms of scheming up the passing game. They rank 5th to 8th for pass game coaching. I have always had some remarks on Kevin O'Connell's run game design being, I don't know, kind of like Zach Taylor-esque coming out of the Sean McVay coaching tree, where it just hasn't felt very creative and felt like, it's always felt like the run game side of things has always been a little bit lacking with Kevin O'Connell. So he does come in 24th to 28th for run game coaching. And hopefully getting Frank Smith in here can prove that, they will be a little bit more creative, adapt a little bit more from what's been somewhat of a predictable, like, wide zone oriented run game, get a little bit more pre-snap motion, moving defenders before the snap, vary in, some other gap and sweep and different stuff that we saw the Dolphins run with Frank Smith down there in Miami. So I'm excited to hopefully see, an upgraded version of a Kevin O'Connell run game here. But they still very much have to prove that they can bring something to the table from a run game perspective. But it really has been the pass game side of things, painting an easy picture for the quarterback, and just the way he kind of like communicates things, and historically has gotten the most out of his quarterbacks, whether it was Kirk Cousins playing the best ball of his career, or even like Josh Dobbs played well here for a little bit, Sam Darnold, obviously. We thought it was going to be the same thing with JJ McCarthy, and it wasn't. So still a ton of respect for what he has accomplished, but I do think in some ways got to get things back on track in terms of how we view Kevin O'Connell. And the other side of O'Connell, too, before I talk a little bit about what his scheme looks like here in Minnesota, is he also is highly respected as just the kind of leader of men type. It does come back to like the quarterback development and just being a good communicator in general. He is a coach that the players have full belief in. He can motivate a team and put together a good culture and a good locker room and generate that belief system as a team. And he's led this Vikings team to a lot of wins, even if they've stalled out in the playoffs for various reasons. So you're going to see respectable rankings for, obviously him as a head coach, I said was 9th, and the overall coach and culture grade is top half in the league as well. So he's not just an offensive guru. That is probably the best of which he brings to the table, but just a good coach in general overseeing the organization. And then, yes, of course, we can discuss what O'Connell's scheme looks like here for the Vikings. He definitely comes from that Sean McVay background, right? And his offense, I would say, largely has been pretty comparable to what the sort of like early Matthew Stafford Rams offenses did look like when Kevin O'Connell was there, where a lot of the core concepts are going to stem from that traditional Shanahan-style offense. Definitely a scheme that wants that idea of a play-action-oriented offense, marry the run and pass, make everything look the same, and all of that good Shanahan lingo. But we definitely saw when Matthew Stafford arrived with McVay and O'Connell with the Rams, they got into a more diverse drop-back passing game. Spreading things out a little bit more, really just introducing all sorts of different concepts, but really focusing at large at like attacking that intermediate to deep intermediate part of the field, really stressing zone defenses in that sense, teaching the quarterback that that's kind of the money area, and whether it's getting there off of play action, sucking those linebackers in and dropping it over the top, or using all sorts of different passing concepts that are going to open things up for like a backside dig. You heard the first year with Matthew Stafford and the Rams. Like I think anytime you heard them talk about that offense, you couldn't go 5 minutes without someone talking about the backside dig. Like that's a part of the field that O'Connell definitely stresses is important to attack. But a big part, of course, of O'Connell being such a well-respected pass game coach and play designer is having multiplicity in the way he can attack and being able to kind of cater to different quarterbacks' skill sets. He's obviously gone through a bunch of different QBs, most of which have outperformed expectations, while O'Connell absolutely comes from that Shanahan-McVay style background. I do think in general, just an ability to have a complete, balanced, versatile playbook in the pass game and a real high-end NFL caliber drop-back passing game is a big selling point on Kevin O'Connell as the OC here. Now, I mentioned it, but the run game side of things has been pretty mid in Minnesota. They honestly were a little bit better than you could have hoped for last year, but still just pretty stagnant, both in terms of like not taking that next step as a run game for the Vikings, but like literally stagnant, feeling relatively predictable coming from that McVay background. You would expect a lot of outside zone, and that was the case. Like they ran 30% of their runs were outside zone. That was about 3.5% higher than the league average. Formationally, there wasn't and hasn't been a ton of like pre-snap motion. It's basically all either 11 personnel or 12 personnel here. And, O'Connell's not dumb. He's going to run some other stuff, but they haven't had a ton of success in doing so, and certainly not consistently. And I think generally it has just felt a little bit like a predictable, at this point in the NFL timeline, maybe a little bit of an outdated approach in the run game that really came over underneath that McVay offense in that 2020, 2021 point in time, where it was in the years afterwards that McVay really got into an inside run oriented, gap oriented, duo oriented run game that McVay really has evolved into a highly respected run game coach. O'Connell hasn't quite caught up in terms of bringing that side of being an offensive coach to the table, hence the split in high-ranking pass game coach rankings versus run game. That is, though, why getting Frank Smith is so interesting here. And no disrespect to Wes Phillips, who is the actual offensive coordinator here, but Obviously, things have been the way they've been here under O'Connell for a while, and I think it's relatively telling that a few other names have been picked out of this coaching system before, the actual offensive coordinator in Wes Phillips. I don't know how much Wes Phillips himself is truly bringing to the table, with all due respect. I'm not too familiar with him, but not someone that you hear about too much. But Frank Smith, now with the title of assistant head coach, but with a background in a Mike McDaniel offense, I think O'Connell looked at that and was like, man, if I can listen to him and get pre-snap motion and bring in a bunch of new creative, creative ways to do the outside run game that isn't just lining up in 11 or 12 personnel, stagnant and running outside zone. Like, think of those Dolphins offenses under Mike McDaniel and Frank Smith, like the amount of pre-snap motion, getting the fullback more involved. And another huge thing here too, and it's not necessarily something Frank Smith did with like Tua in Miami, but the QB run game. That's a huge part of what Kyler Murray can bring to the table. We've seen it in little spurts with Kevin O'Connell, at times running read option with J.J. McCarthy, a little bit of it when Josh Dobbs was the QB, but it certainly isn't the first thing you think of with Kevin O'Connell is a creative QB run design. But can he get into the lab? Look at what the Cardinals and some other teams have done with really athletic quarterbacks to add an extra numbers advantage to the run game. Now there's, can Kyler stay durable doing that? There's other things that get into the mix there. But between the addition of Frank Smith and now the true addition of one of the best designed run quarterbacks in the league being brought into the mix here, or if it's J.J. McCarthy, if he wins this job, he can do stuff like that too. There is so much potential for this idea that, yeah, Kevin O'Connell's great, but is the run game side of things anything really to write home about? Is this the year that evolves into something more special here? I think there's a big chance that happens, but obviously they still got to go out and prove that. But there is your offensive coaching side of things in great hands there, and then we already alluded to it, but Brian Flores is easily one of the best defensive minds in the league who has consistently elevated this defense. That's reflected in the defensive coach rankings here, where they rank top 3 for pass defense coaching, 4th to 6th for run defense coaching. And not only has Flores taken, like in the first year he got here, a bad roster and turned it into a top 10 defense, but he's taken at many points in time like an average roster and made them one of the best defenses in the NFL. But he's done that running the most creative, innovative system in the league in this time. And even more crazy than that, this thing has looked a little different every single year. And it's almost become a talking point for the Vikings deep dive every year at this point. The fact that it's almost hard to predict what little creative wrinkle Brian Flores is going to bring to the table that's going to help uplift this thing. In the first year he got here, had that really fun idea of sort of that like min-maxed defensive approach where they didn't just blitz a ton, but when they did blitz, it was almost always a zero blitz, but also not just leading the league in zero blitz, but also leading the league in 3-man rushes. So just that chaotic randomness of offenses having to prepare for both sides of that brought a lot of success to the table. That one was a little bit less sustainable. Teams seemed to figure out that Vikings defense in the last month or so of the 2023 season. 2024 got back to being a little bit more of a traditional style of defense, but still being extremely creative with those blitzes, different loops and stunts, and creating manufactured pressures with just a really creative pass rushing package and trying to vary those coverages on the back end. And then last year, one of the creative wrinkles brought to the table here was being towards the top of the league and actually blitzing out of quarters coverages. Most of these zone blitzes that NFL teams are used to seeing are going to be cover 3 and cover 2 based blitzes. But Flores really dipping into the college film and finding some creative ways to stay in these 2 shell structures, which that's become a core part of what the Vikings are doing here and the whole league at large is the pre-snap 2 shell, post-snap rotation causing confusion. Like that's pretty much what everybody's doing now. Flores is no different, but figuring out how to still present those pre-snap looks and post-snap looks in many ways, getting into cover 4-oriented blitzes with good match zone on the back end of that. And that brought a lot of success to the Vikings last year. And then on top of all of this, the formational creativity that we've seen in Minnesota really all 3 years. One of the main base defenses that Brian Flores runs here is that 5-1 penny front defense, but as a 3 safety defense, and using the use of a Josh Metellus as a true hybrid player, being part linebacker, part safety, part slot corner. And I've talked about it a lot at this point, but what that allows you to do is come out in that defense, and with Metellus able to step in and be a linebacker, that will act as a base 3-4. But it's in the middle of being a true base defense, which is only going to have 4 defensive backs on the field. And on the other side of that is you're halfway towards being a nickel defense with better athletes on the field. So in a league that is so focused on coming out in like early down, heavy personnel, trying to get teams into those base packages so that they can out athlete you through their play action attack, the Vikings have counteracted that with the use of that big safety. And Flores isn't fully unique to the idea of using a third safety to bridge that gap between base and nickel defense. But to do it out of this style front is more innovative and presents a different picture than, say, the Mike McDonald systems, where, yes, they'll take a Kyle Hamilton or a Derwin James or a Nicky Manwari as that big nickel, half linebacker, half nickel corner, but those are more out of a 4-2 base defense with that big safety as the nickel corner. This is just different, where you have 5 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker, and then that hybrid player. So that is at the core of a lot of what the Vikings do, is those 3 safety defenses, and building their roster around that in many ways. Now, to be fair, we did see last year the Vikings be more of a traditional base defense. They actually got up to running 50% base defense, which I believe is the most they've run in the Brian Flores era. So that was another new wrinkle to what they were doing last year. And really being, going back to the Belichick roots with Brian Flores too here, where, yeah, it was largely a 3-4 base defense with the idea of those outside backers that can sometimes drop into coverage and play into the confusion aspect of this entire scheme. But we did definitely see about a fifth of those base defenses was more of a 4-3 structured front, and taking that kind of heavy-handed defensive end. Putting them out there as a 5-tech a lot of times as well. So like the going back to the roots of a base multiple defense that you would certainly think of with some of those classic Bill Belichick defenses. And the last point here on a Brian Flores defense, if you're getting lost in all of the football lingo and the mumbo jumbo, is, I would say, 3 words can define a Brian Flores defense. And that would be confusion, multiplicity, and blitz. The Vikings blitzed the most in the NFL last year. That's been very consistent with Brian Flores here. They are freaking coming after you on top of all of the different creative stuff they do. In other words, the name for this scheme, in my opinion, is just evil genius shit. That's really what Brian Flores does and brings to the table here. And again, I'll reiterate that point, really uplifts what you can expect for the defense, even if when we get to the defensive roster breakdown, you might look at it on paper and be like, there's not, there's no superstars here. There's not a whole lot to get like thrilled about on paper, yet they've consistently put out top 10 defenses since Brian Flores has been here, because he's that good. And again, it's just a massive luxury that the Vikings get to keep him around here, because he should be a head coach in the NFL somewhere. And that wraps up a look at a really special coaching staff, as I said, in the debate for the best pairing of offensive and defensive minds in charge of an NFL team, and a massive driver towards this team being the 18th team in my power rankings. But that's not to say that Flores and O'Connell don't have real pieces on this roster to work with as well that I'm excited to break down. But before we get into the roster, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video, and that is Prize Picks. And Prize Picks lineups are here to ramp up your interest in the World Cup finale. I don't know much about soccer, but I think this Lionel Messi guy with Prize Picks special World Cup promo, I think can complete one pass is all we need to contribute to a winning Prize Picks lineup this weekend. But after the World Cup is done, Prize Picks also has you covered with baseball and all sorts of other, not just competitive sports, but esports as well. I saw they have a Call of Duty event going on this weekend. So with Prize Picks lineups, you're just selecting more or less on any number of player stats. Build your lineup and compete for a chance at massive payouts. Prize Picks also has team picks now available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. So you can pick the winner, spread, and total on any major game. I'm especially excited for the social media aspect of Prize Picks as well. I'm not saying to follow along with my baseball and World Cup picks necessarily, but once we get into football season, excited to share out my favorite lineups and picks for the NFL. So when you sign up, make sure you follow my handle there. It's at TFG_football, just like my Twitter handle. And now if you sign up using code HMA, they will also give you $50 in bonus lineups when you play your first $5 in Prize Picks lineups. So a huge shout out to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's deep dive. Let's get back into it. But now it is time to discuss the ever entertaining quarterback situation for the Minnesota Vikings and discuss the big questions surrounding the Vikings this season. And that is, who is going to be the starting quarterback for this team this year between the signing of Kyler Murray and, of course, the young J.J. McCarthy? Well, in my opinion, this isn't much of a debate. And I really haven't gotten too involved in a lot of the J.J. McCarthy versus Kyler Murray discourse out there on social media, because in my mind, it is Kyler Murray. And that is because just at the root of it all, Kevin O'Connell knows that this is a locker room full of talent and veterans that believe this team is a quarterback away from at least competing for a Super Bowl. And they put all their chips in the J.J. McCarthy basket, and they were not a team in the Super Bowl picture last year, obviously. And whatever ends up happening with J.J. McCarthy, Kevin O'Connell, and I'm not saying he is on the hot seat, not yet at least, but he owes it to his team to essentially avoid the opportunity for J.J. McCarthy to derail another season here in Minnesota. And that is why Kyler Murray, unless he looks like complete crap in camp and the preseason, or until we get maybe a third of the way through this season and things aren't working with Kyler Murray, for me, it is an easy decision to start Kyler Murray and see where things can go with this team. Now, that's not to say there isn't a J.J. McCarthy conversation to be had here, which I'm going to get to, but I am certainly going to start with who I think will be the Week 1 starter for the Vikings, and honestly, who I think will be the Week 18 starter for the Vikings, and that is Kyler Murray. Because yes, as a baseline, Kevin O'Connell owes it to the Vikings to see what Kyler Murray might be able to do to raise the floor of this entire team. But it's not just a baseline conversation for me. This isn't like bringing in your Joe Schmo bridge quarterback. There's actual real reason to be excited about the upside of the Vikings with Kyler Murray, in my opinion. And it's not an eye for an eye comparison, but what an opportunity for the Vikings, who did make the mistake of letting Sam Darnold out the building and put all their chips in the J.J. McCarthy basket and had to be the victims of their own decision-making in many ways. What an opportunity to do something similar and buy low on a Kyler Murray, and then maybe by season's end actually learn from history and their own mistakes and stick with Kyler Murray for the long run. And maybe we are putting the cart before the horse a little bit there, but I've always been a big defender of Kyler Murray, and honestly, it's probably yet another reason why the Vikings come in maybe a few spots higher in my power rankings than a lot out there. I've gone as far as saying a couple of years ago that Kyler Murray is the most underrated player in the sport. Now, I don't know that I necessarily feel that strongly about him at this point. There's definite flaws that you can point to with him in terms of processing, decision making. He is inconsistent in terms of his ability and willingness to see and attack the middle of the field, especially, which is absolutely something worth bringing up here. That, I mean, we just spent 5 minutes talking about how Kevin O'Connell loves to attack the middle of the field. It's not exactly a perfect fit. It's a little bit of a square peg round hole. But there's no doubt in my mind that Kyler Murray is a talented quarterback, was the best available option for the Vikings and probably any team out there. I think Kyler Murray was the best quarterback option on the market this offseason, just as Sam Darnold was the year before. And the opportunity to basically have Kyler Murray choose you, knowing he was going to take a cheap league minimum contract wherever he went because the Cardinals are paying him to play for someone else. The fact that he chose the Vikings was enough to kind of override some of the questions about like, oh, is this the ideal scheme fit for Kevin O'Connell? No, Kevin O'Connell is going to have to make some adjustments from his side of things, do what good coaches do and say, all right, we have a talented player. Let's modify some things and build things the right way around Kyler Murray. Now, that's not to say Kyler just like never attacks the middle of the field. I think there's relevant criticisms there, but we've seen him do it inside a Drew Petzing offense the last couple of years. And obviously, like, you don't want this Vikings offense to look like what the Drew Petzing offense looked like with Kyler Murray. I'm not saying that, but those are principles that Kevin O'Connell values. We've seen Kyler do it. What I'm saying is there's a middle ground to be found with Kevin O'Connell and Frank Smith and the guys in place to come in and build this new version of a Vikings offense, just as we saw Kevin O'Connell mold this offense with like a Josh Dobbs when he stepped in, be a little bit more innovative. I do think Kevin O'Connell deserves the benefit of the doubt to say that he's not just going to be super stubborn about this and basically do what the Cardinals did to Kyler Murray under Drew Petzing and say, no, you're going to run Drew's offense. No, I think this coaching staff is earning the benefit of the doubt that say it's going to be a little bit more liquid than that. And even Kevin O'Connell's offense has shown more multiplicity, as we discussed, in terms of getting the QB in the gun, spreading things out a little bit more. Concepts that Kyler Murray prefers to live in the gun and spreading the ball around like that. So there are certain limitations to Kyler's game and definitely a scheme conversation that needed to be had there. But as far as Kyler, the football player, I will continue to defend him as an underrated talent at the quarterback position. I think the way people talk about him is like, he just literally can't see the field. He just hides behind his offensive line and, can't make any good decisions with the ball. I'm not sitting here trying to say he's even like top half in terms of processing and decision making, but I think a lot of people think he's just incapable of like making pro reads and taking care of the ball. And it's just not the case. We've seen at least, I don't know, if you're going to rank Kyler Murray's processing and decision making, let's just put it at like 25th out of 32 starters, right? Like it's a weakness for him relative to other quarterbacks, but it's not completely dysfunctional either. And when that's his weakness on top of all of the other strengths he brings to the table, like, how can you not love his playmaking ability? I do think he has that sixth sense, excellent pocket feel to find playmaking opportunities, to move throughout the pocket, knowing when to get out of the pocket and use his legs, where he will beat you with his arm on the move, but he's also top 3 as a scrambling threat in the NFL. He probably has the best individual acceleration as a quarterback. So when he decides to take off, the way that he's able to burn away from encroaching defensive linemen is a special trait for him, and his ability to kind of win angles to the perimeter and turn what for most quarterbacks would be a 6-yard scramble into a 20-yard scamper. He can legitimately create chunk plays when he does scramble. His arm talent is not what people would think for a 5'9" quarterback. I mean, this is a generational athletic talent, right? He was the 8th overall pick in the MLB draft. He has a great arm, real arm talent to throw to all 3 levels of the field, to throw on the run, to drive tight window throws. I wouldn't say he's the most accurate quarterback. It's not his best trait, but he is more than accurate enough. And when you can find the right balance with him as a designed runner, he provides a really special ability to add a numbers advantage and add an explosive runner of the football to the mix as well. And I think even as things have been going poorly with him and Arizona and public perception of him, I think these traits, these phenomenal traits he has have combined to give him a higher floor of quarterback play than people even would say with him. Like, the common narrative is like, well, yeah, of course they quote unquote benched him for Jacoby Brissett. Of course they cut him and are paying him to play for another team, as if he played like Russell Wilson did on the Broncos or something like that. Or when Brock Osweiler got paid, someone traded the Texans traded a second round pick to get rid of Brock Osweiler. People talk about it like it's that obvious of a decision. Look, the Cardinals, we did their deep dive, right? Like, dude, they just took Carson Beck with the 65th pick in the draft. They're being held over hostage by Jacoby Brissett right now. I wouldn't exactly say that they are the pinnacle of proper decision making when it comes to the quarterback position. Was it time for a change? Yeah, almost certainly. But is Kyler completely in the wrong for that? I don't think so. And I think Kyler's 2025 season is largely misunderstood as well. I don't think Kyler played that much different in the, 4.5 games we got to see from him in the early season of the Cardinals last year than we have come to expect Kyler Murray able to play. Was he perfect? No, absolutely not. I'm not trying to say Kyler Murray is a top 10 quarterback at this point in time. I've got him ranked 20th, in fact. But somehow Kyler has caught all of the blame for Marvin Harrison Jr. literally like getting the yips in that first month of the season. Somehow that was Kyler's fault, because as soon as Kyler goes down with the injury, Marvin Harrison starts making plays again with Jacoby Brissett. And then you end up with a Cardinals team that was completely uncompetitive, that had no run game, because Kyler Murray is a big part of the Cardinals run game. And the Cardinals were down 2 scores all the time with no run game. They threw the ball like 50-something times a game. And you see all these fantasy stats from Jacoby Brissett and Michael Wilson, and Marvin Harrison had a couple good games with the passing volume. And people are like, the Cardinals were better with Jacoby Brissett than they were with Kyler. It's like, no, actually, they were 1-11 and just threw the ball a bunch. And I like Jacoby for what he is, but I do think Kyler, and I know I'm like Mr. Always Defends Kyler Murray guy, but I am really excited to see what things could look like here. And I think Kyler Murray can absolutely get back to the higher end version of what Kyler was in the peak of his powers when he had DeAndre Hopkins and things were at least less of a shit show in Arizona. With Cliff Kingsbury, who was not a great head coach, but was and still is a good play designer, like he's going to have with Kevin O'Connell here, right? And I think the idea that Kyler Murray could play at least something like what Sam Darnold was for this team as sort of a fringe top 10 to 14 quarterback in the league, that doesn't seem far-fetched to me at all. I would maybe even bet on it. And if that happens, the Vikings are going to be right in the playoff mix. You're playing Kyler all season, and you're not letting that guy out the building either when the season's done, like they did with Sam Darnold the last time around. And that kind of takes me to the J.J. McCarthy side of this conversation. And I know it seems like I'm giving J.J. McCarthy no chance at all and writing him off as a bust. I think we've seen enough to know that these young quarterbacks, especially as inexperienced and as young as J.J. McCarthy is, like, not just with only 10 starts in the NFL or whatever it is, but like he hardly threw the ball at Michigan, right? We've seen enough around the league to know, like, yeah, JJ's career might not, like, his story might not be written here. With more reps and work at this thing, he could come along, and he's athletic. He's got a pretty strong arm. Everybody swears by his personality and his, work ethic and all that stuff, and that's great. But like I said, the lows have been so bad with him, as we saw last year. Just bad accuracy, holding onto the ball too long, taking bad sacks, unable to like get through reads. It was really close to like a Zach Wilson level, holy shit, this guy does not know how to play quarterback type of deal. Now, came back at the end of the season. They really tuned down the offense for him, simplified what throws they were asking him to make just to kind of help keep his head above water. You can also point to the fact that these receivers did not play like we expect these receivers to play like last year, and the offensive line had some pretty damn bad moments for J.J. McCarthy as well. There's real excuses to be made there. But for me, I just don't see a clear path for him to get back on the field here for this Vikings team based on how I think Kyler Murray is going to perform here. Obviously, if Kyler struggles and you're 1-6, you're going to make that move, and hopefully you see that growth and development that you're hoping to see from JJ McCarthy. But I think the most realistic, probable situation here is that Kyler Murray plays like a top 15 quarterback, that the Vikings are happy with that they extend Kyler Murray, and we see J.J. McCarthy get another opportunity and is almost viewed as another quarterback in next year's draft class. And I think that could be a potential best case scenario for all parties involved. If JJ can go on and figure things out deeper into his career. But, that's just kind of how I see things panning out this season. If it were to get to a situation where JJ is stepping in, like I said, you're back in evaluation mode with him as a Viking, and there's different potential futures here where either he works out and he's the QB of your future, or the Vikings are sitting here looking at the quarterbacks in next year's draft. It's obviously a wild card for this team, to say the least. I'm not going to sit here and be like, my opinion is gospel and like, yeah, Kyler Murray's obviously going to work here. He's obviously going to be a top 12 to 15 quarterback by the end of the season. That's certainly what I'm betting on and how I'm going to discuss it here in this deep dive. But we are certainly, at the end of the day, back to where we were last year on this Vikings team, where so much of what's going to happen this year is how this volatile quarterback room shakes down, even if I'm quite optimistic that Kyler Murray is going to be that guy here. But as we head in, they come in ranked 20th overall at quarterback for me, with that green up arrow on Kyler Murray, expecting them to climb here this season. Kyler getting back on track. But let's talk about the rest of this roster and if they are still a quarterback away from being a Super Bowl type of team like we discussed with them in last year's deep dive. And no, by the way, I'm not going to spend much time talking about Carson Wentz or Max Brosmer in that quarterback room, but I will discuss this backfield and the running back room. And we'll begin looking at their offseason changes. I didn't mention it for quarterback, but obviously I see that room as upgraded, by the way, with Kyler Murray coming in there. But at running back, they don't really do anything other than drafting Damon Claiborne in the 6th round. I said ever so slightly upgraded. It's a new explosive body in the room that they did not have last year. We'll talk about Claiborne more, but call it neutral, call it ever so slightly upgraded. Very minor additions to this backfield, which is kind of unfortunate, honestly. The Vikings didn't feel like they were going to be big spenders in what was a pretty decent free agent market at running back, and this draft class was historically bad at running back, and that was pretty bad timing for the Vikings because they have, to me, one of the worst running back situations in the league. They came in 29th for me at running back, with Aaron Jones another year older. He'll be 32 years old this year, and then Jordan Mason, who's a good runner. He's enough to keep the Vikings from incompetency, right? Like, he is a low-end starting running back. Ideally, Jordan Mason should probably be more in that RB2 category type of guy. Like, he is a full speed ahead, big, like pretty good speed for a larger running back. Kind of a one-track pony, as that kind of speed train runner. He's not horrible, but he's pretty one-dimensional, and he has shown a case of the fumbles, 3 fumbles over the last 2 seasons, and that's not getting like a full workload either. That's really on a pace for 5 or 6 fumble seasons if he were to be more of your featured back. So, and Andy really doesn't bring anything in the receiving game either. So I don't want to say like he's horrible. With the right blocking in front of him, he can have some good moments. There's a lot of good running backs in the league, and he's a floor raiser in that sense. But you compare him as the lead back for the Vikings to the rest of the league, and you're pretty underwhelmed. And then you have Aaron Jones. Hopefully, maybe, right? Like, Aaron Jones has always been an injury-prone guy. The Vikings have witnessed that here, and the Vikings have understood at this point, like, just as the Packers knew, like, you really have to limit his touches if you want to get to the end of the year. And Aaron Jones is not just able to play, but Aaron Jones is like the same guy he is in the first half of the season. He absolutely wears down. It's just part of his player profile at this point. So he looks good here, relatively speaking, as an RB2 in July heading into this season. But realistically, 5-6 touches a game for Aaron Jones if you want to get him through the year, or you do what the Vikings have done and lean on him heavier to start the season. And, you don't have him at the end of the year, basically. And also, how much have we seen him regress, right? This isn't peak Aaron Jones. This is a 32-year-old version of Aaron Jones that has endured all these injuries. You're still talking about a pretty good athlete, someone with exceptional vision. I mean, you can't deny Aaron Jones has been one of the best RB vision types of guys over the last 5 to 6 years. That's a defining trait for him, and that's always going to play, right? Especially if you have good blocking in front of him. And he is more of an impact as a pass-catching threat than Jordan Mason is. Certainly a better route runner. Had some drops last year, but generally speaking, more reliable hands. At the end of the day, I love Aaron Jones. He is an elite human off the field, and I'm sure they just love having him in that locker room. But we got to be realistic about kind of what he is as an RB2 at this point in time. And then after that, it's underwhelming, right? You have Xavier Scott, who is fascinating to me. He's kind of a poor man's version of Tyrone Tracy Jr., where he played wide receiver at Maine, but he's like 6 foot, 220 pounds, and he tested really well, and the Vikings have converted him to running back here. So, I'm intrigued by the theoretical upside of a small school athletic, position conversion type of project here. We saw a little bit of him last year, and he runs hard, and the Vikings love their undrafted kind of gem types, and I'm intrigued, but he's entirely unproven, and it's hard to expect that high of an upside from him. And then you have Damond Claiborne, who I know a lot of people are excited about. There's a handful of these guys in this draft class, especially. Basically, any back that had any sort of athletic talent in this draft class, or any back that went to a backfield that had clear opportunities, has generated some buzz out of this just egregiously terrible running back class that I do genuinely believe is the worst running back class of all time. And Claiborne, who ran fast and goes to a Vikings team here that clearly there could be a chance for some carries here, right? I get it. Like the theoretical addition of an explosive runner, you bring Mike Smith over, who had Devon Achane, and I've tried to open up my mind to these smaller sized running backs, right? I really have. And I am not writing off Damond Claiborne. I'm not. If he becomes an impact player here and kind of a lightning style complement to Jordan Mason, that's great. I'm certainly not saying that's impossible, but I'm also not going to lie about what I saw with my eyeballs. And I was so brutally underwhelmed by Damond Claiborne's tape that he actually did end up the lowest ranked running back out of the 22 guys that I watched in this draft class. I didn't have a draftable grade on him. Yes, he's fast, but he's also fast because he's 185 pounds, 190 pounds soaking wet. And he had one of the worst power profiles I've ever seen for a running back that ultimately got drafted. He went down on first contact constantly. He also didn't have particularly good vision, like creative vision out in space, sure, but he just tried to bounce everything outside and use his speed. And yeah, when you're playing in the ACC against college athletes, you will get away with that at times. But it's going to be different in the NFL. Once that gap is bridged with his just speed and change of direction, I don't know how much you're going to be left with him. So I'm not really on the Damon Claiborne hype train. He's worth talking about because he has that kind of trump card of the speed in an offense that might know how to leverage that. I just didn't see it as an NFL projection personally, but I'd love to be wrong there. So there is your Vikings backfield. Despite the negative tone here, like, it's still a practical NFL backfield. Like, Jordan Mason is a practical NFL runner. As long as everything is like perfect around this situation, like, they can take advantage of good blocking and be enough for the Vikings to get by as they keep their eyes open for RBs in the future. There's a reason we talk about running back, being devalued and everything. It's because even the 29th ranked RB room in the league has competent runners like Jordan Mason and an old Aaron Jones, but they're not really going to elevate much here. And compared to the backfields of pretty much every other team in the league, it's going to be on the underwhelming side of things. And I think that's fair. But let's change our tone a little bit and talk about this group of pass catchers, one of the truly special groups of pass catchers in the league that, in my opinion, really only got better this offseason. I know they lost Jalen Nailor. I think Jalen Nailor is an adequate wide receiver 3, but overall a pretty replaceable piece. They bring in Juwan Jennings, who is also one of the underrated players in the NFL out of the NFC West, such as Kyler Murray was. But I'm really excited to talk about how Juwan Jennings fits into this mix. At tight end, staying the same there, but they did add a fullback in Max Bredesen in the 5th round, hinting at him maybe being their Alec Ingold, a little more of a move block specialist to spice up this run game. But I do have the Vikings weapons in that same tier we just had with the Dallas Cowboys as a top 3 group of pass catchers, and an obvious reason to get excited about this passing game. And I think a lot of people's initial reactions are going to be, wait, that's too high. I do think that this quarterback situation was such a disaster last year that recency bias makes us think a lot lower of not just Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, who we'll talk about, but Justin Jefferson as well, who we're just a year removed from feeling pretty damn confident saying this is the best wide receiver in the league, right? And you give him bottom 3 quarterback play, and yeah, he's going to have a down year. They're going to have a hard time funneling the passing game through him, especially because there were times where they maybe made efforts to do that, and it was so obvious that was the game plan, and the only way they were going to try to move the ball, the teams were able to focus on that and start taking that away. And unfortunately, they just weren't able to really progress through to these other options last year. So it was truly a disaster. Obviously, like, there's a lot of benefit of the doubt for what this group was just a year ago to give them this incredibly respectable ranking as a top 3 group of weapons in the league. But I don't know, man. I still think this group has it going on, and I'm willing to buy back into this unit. Justin Jefferson is no longer going to get that 99 rating for me, despite the fact that, yeah, they had such bad quarterback play and all the things we just talked about. There were some games last year where Jefferson had some drops and even some moments that you wouldn't really say for a whole lot of other wide receivers, but definitely watching some Vikings games, it was, a lot of moments where it's like, ooh, JJ usually has that. So he lost a little bit of that, oh my God, this guy's unstoppable, one of the clear, top 5 players in the sport. He lost a little bit of that, but I mean, when he did it consistently for 5 straight seasons the year before that, he's just 27 years old, and it's not like there weren't Justin Jefferson-esque moments sprinkled into last year's disastrous season. And even in a worst case scenario year for Justin Jefferson, he still had over 1,000 receiving yards, contested catch win rate at 50%, still had tied for a career high in missed tackles forced. Man, he's still, to me, right in that debate for who the best wide receiver in the NFL is, even if JSN and Puka, made that debate even harder this year. Jamar Chase had an awesome year last year. It's a tighter debate now than it was maybe a year or two ago. But to me, I'm still willing to put JJ in that, unless another year happens where he's more like he was last year, which is, like a top 10 to 15 wide receiver in the sport. But yeah, he's earned this benefit of the doubt to me. But after him, you can still look at this thing and see just such a well-crafted diversity of skill sets with really talented players here. And there's a chance for this to look even better than it ever has because of the addition of Jauan Jennings that does bring an extra little wrinkle to the table here. But before I talk about Jauan Jennings, let's discuss Jordan Addison. Addison has very well documented off-field drama, I would say. I would say it's pretty clear at this point that Addison's a little bit of a knucklehead, driving infractions, getting into trouble at a casino at 3 a.m, just weird off-field, immature stuff with him, right? But outside of a 3-game suspension last year for a DUI, well-deserved, in my opinion, you're still largely expecting him to be there and available for this team. And now it's more a matter of where does he land for this year and beyond. He's clearly a very talented, very skilled wide receiver. He's got an it factor about him, has proven the ability to play above his size and make some really impressive catches for a very slender player. Because he's so slender, he can move just differently than most wide receivers can. He can clearly separate. He's got good speed. He's definitely got those instincts and elusiveness after the catch. You put all that together, and even if he bothers me off the field, and I don't know necessarily what his long-term future is with the Vikings, his floor is still a really good number 2 wide receiver, especially when Justin Jefferson is one of the few wide receivers that you actually will see defenses actively double teaming and shadowing with cornerbacks. Addison is guaranteed in this setup to get number 2 corners and have zone coverages slide away from him towards Justin Jefferson. He's going to get more space to operate, but for me, we've seen Addison at times when he's locked in and not doing what he did last year, which is getting suspended and having a career high drop rate. He had more drops in 14 games last year, or at least tied for as many drops last year as he's had his first 2 years here in Minnesota. He had 7 last year and 7 in 2023 and 2024 combined. So last year was definitely a worst case scenario in terms of the knuckleheadedness caught up to him, caused him to miss games, and he had some bad moments with drops. And then you have this disastrous quarterback situation where he's coming into it in the middle of the year, right? He comes in week 4 right in the midst of oh my God, JJ McCarthy can't play. Hell, I think he even came back for the London game, which he even, as Arif, I didn't even know this, Arif said in the interview, he actually got suspended for the first half of the London game, which I had kind of forgotten about, to be honest, because he got lost in London, which is so Jordan Addison. But he comes in with, I think that was Carson Wentz's first start. He actually had 2 drops in that game. So just nothing was able to get going last year, right? So I still think the floor with Jordan Addison is a very useful, good at times, number 2 wide receiver. But we've seen him at times be more of a high-end number 2 type of guy here as well. And I think with things settling down a little bit, you could absolutely get that version of Jordan Addison, especially as he has motivation coming up on a hopeful contract extension, seeing all these massive paydays around the league. He's got a reason to really lock in here. So he does have that yellow arrow on me with an 80 rating. I would say he played below that last year. He's played at or slightly above that for the rest of his career, in my opinion. Kind of a wild card in that sense of where does he land necessarily, but still a nice piece of the pie here one way or another. And then you've got Jauan Jennings coming here. And Jauan Jennings has been so underrated for me because in a crowded Niners group of weapons for the majority of Jauan Jennings' career, he's been the guy that teams just can't afford to focus on, yet he does so much in the short to intermediate game that just is a complete thorn in opposing defense's side. Number one is for a Vikings team that loves to play 11 personnel. They were 10th in 11 personnel last year. They come from that Sean McVay background. They want that big-bodied third wide receiver, the Cooper Kupp role They haven't really had that here. They haven't. Now they get that guy in Jauan Jennings who will block his ass off. And he is an addition to the run game in that sense. But as teams are focusing on Justin Jefferson and even Addison to an extent down the field, Jauan Jennings is going to find holes in zones. He's going to sit down in the flat. He's going to be just ready and available. And especially with a Kyler Murray who can run around, he can find Jauan Jennings late. And Jauan Jennings will make that first guy miss. He will consistently catch the ball. He will outmuscle linebackers and safeties that are around him for contested catches. He is just such a pain in the ass underneath. And then we've also seen at times with him in San Francisco, they've had to make him a bigger part of the passing game. And he's had some pretty big moments, like making some of those tough catches down the field, showing that he is a little more nuanced as a route runner, that he is, honestly, man, Jauan Jennings has been kind of a poor man's Drake London at some points in the last few years. They get him on the cheap, 1 year, like $8 million contract here. I love it. I love how he fits with these top three wide receivers. And then you're not done, right? You have TJ Hawkinson, who's another yellow arrow player for me. Definitely has been trending down. There's so much of what happened last year that you can start to make excuses for some of these guys to the point where you might say, yes, TJ Hawkinson, still just 29 years old, with a little bit of a reset and one more opportunity here to get a big contract with an upgrade in quarterback play and a quarterback that has shown the ability to feed a Trey McBride, for example, and a chance to look at this as a contract year truly to come in motivated. There is a chance that TJ Hawkinson plays really well, earns big money, whether that's here or for somewhere else. That's up for future debate, right? But there's definitely a world where TJ Hawkinson can get back on track and be viewed as like, we're not too far removed from discussing him as a top 5 tight end. He's been probably more in the 15 range the last 2 years. He's still been a useful player, but there's been just like scattered drops. He hasn't done really anything after the catch the last 2 years. It's been like, even when he does, when he does catch the ball, it's kind of straight to the ground. He's been very inconsistent with like contested catches and getting his feet down in tough situations. It's been really streaky, and certainly Vikings fans, just me living in Minnesota, I hear a lot of people that are sick of this guy. I still think there is some upside there, but there's a lot of truth to the fact that he's also been trending down. And, if he's lost half a step and he just has kind of lost his game a little bit, he might not play up to an 81 rating that I have on him here, for an example, and could be phased out here. But the beauty of the Jauan Jennings signing is that he's going to do a lot of the stuff that you expect TJ Hawkinson to do. And from a fantasy perspective, I really wouldn't touch either of those guys because they're both going to get those types of underneath targets and attacking the, short to intermediate part of zone coverages. But I just love that the Jennings signing makes it so that, you don't need to count on TJ Hawkinson, but if Hawkinson does lock back in, you're like, damn, man, how do we really stop all these guys? Because the best version of TJ Hawkinson is that mismatched tight end that can separate on intermediate routes and be a more dynamic pass catching tight end for sure. Now, I don't really want to spend much more time on these backs. Aaron Jones would be your best option in that sense. Obviously, he's slowing down, but has been, in his peak of his powers, was one of the best receiving backs in the league. So some shell of that guy is theoretically still in there. Xavier Scott is fascinating as well with that receiver's background, and maybe Damon Claiborne does a little more than we got to see him do in college. There's some theoretical upside there, but I don't think they really feel the need to get to those backs too much in the passing game. And then beyond that, I will admit there is not a ton of depth here. You got to keep these guys healthy. Not that there's definitive injury concerns necessarily. Jennings, maybe. But Jennings shouldn't see so much of a workload that he becomes too much of an injury threat here. But wide receiver especially, this might be the worst set of backups in the league. Like, okay, Ty Felton was a 3rd-round pick last year who they've seemingly kind of forgotten about already in many ways. He was good after the catch in college, probably drafted a little bit early. Certainly was for my taste. I mean, he's the best of what they have. Maybe he surprises, but I wouldn't really count on that. I think he kind of is what he is as a smaller run after catch threat type of guy. Miles Price is a really nice looking returner, but has yet to catch a pass for this team since breaking through into that return role. I mean, it's kind of bad that like we're already kind of having to talk about like undrafted depth maybe becoming important. Like Dylan Bell was the only other guy in this depth chart that I frankly even really recognized. And I didn't like Dylan Bell. He was your classic, like, it didn't take long for me to kind of get the point with him, where he looks the part. He played at Georgia, highly recruited guy, presumably, fills out his pads, tested well, all that, but couldn't separate or catch the football, which is kind of a problem when you play wide receiver. So if injuries do start to stack up, the Vikings are very poorly equipped to handle that, so keep that in the back of your mind. The tight end room is a little more interesting. Like, you do have Josh Oliver, who's a really nice tight end too. I think at this point, counting on him to be more than that is unrealistic. He's theoretically fast, and he doesn't have like horrible hands, but he just doesn't really have those receiving instincts. But he's done a great job to become a really nice piece for 12 personnel as a blocker. So he is theoretically good tight end depth and a tight end two in general. Ben Yurosek is fascinating to me. He was a nice athlete coming out of Georgia who played most of his college ball at Stanford. And tell me if you've heard this before, but Georgia not getting the most out of a athletic pass catcher. Surprise, surprise. But he ends up making this team last year and getting on the field and, you know, very unproven, but I think he's got some traits to be fascinated by. And then you do draft Ben Bredesen, who's really here to be a utility blocker all over the formation as a tight end, as a fullback, and was damn good at that at Michigan. So I don't think it was a bad use of a pick, especially if they want more of a, you know, fullback, H-back type of guy. Gavin Bartholomew was drafted a year ago. Pretty standard backup tight end type of prospect that has kind of been passed up by the undrafted piece in Ben Yurosek there. So I guess I'm a little higher on the tight end depth than the wide receiver depth, but it's really not saying much when I just don't see much wide receiver depth here really at all. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I am obviously quite high on this group of pass catchers still. I mean, call me crazy. I still think Justin Jefferson is freaking awesome and is going to be freaking awesome. And it's not like Kyler Murray doesn't know how to feed a number one wide receiver, right? DeAndre Hopkins was in the conversation for who the best wide receivers were in the league were underneath Kyler Murray. And I think Justin Jefferson's going to be quite happy to have more of a NFL level quarterback back into the mix here. But let's go to the offensive line here in Minnesota. As we look at their offseason changes, Ryan Kelly is going to retire after, not surprisingly, unfortunately, like only playing a third of the season last year. They also say goodbye to Justin Skule, who was their swing tackle, who's heading to Tampa, I think it is. But they did make some additions. They draft Caleb Tiernan, tall athletic tackle out of Northwestern in the third round. They also go and get Ryan Van DeMark, who was a transition tag type of guy that the Vikings kind of stole from the Bills and sort of outbid them in many ways without that transition tag, or, you know, I'm probably butchering what the actual, you know, tender was called, but they went out and kind of made a move to get a swing tackle there in him. And then they did draft Gavin Gerhardt, a 7th round center out of Cincinnati. And I ultimately settled on neutral for this swapping of players, largely, you know, backups coming in and Ryan Kelly, who hardly played for this team, and a backup leaving. I think neutral is fair. But the Vikings offensive line does pair very nicely with a group of pass catchers to still create a really nice supporting cast here for the quarterback and offense to have success. They actually come in as my 6th ranked offensive line. They rank 4th to 6th for pass blocking, 13th for run blocking. Now it's still a B grade for pass blocking, B minus for run blocking, and it's a B grade that gets them 6th. So like, it's not to say they're perfect here. There's not really many offensive lines in the league that are. And the Vikings are still one of the best O-lines in the league, but there are some teams that rank quite high, and there's still some areas to maybe pick some flaws from. And by far the hardest thing with this Vikings offensive line is Christian Darrisaw's health. Someone that has been repeatedly banged up throughout his career, but largely manageable until he goes down with the ACL tear in the middle of that Sam Darnold 2024 season. And then he had a long recovery from that. He tried to push back last year and simply was not the same guy last year. By all accounts, we should be through the woods with that. We should be able to get rolling with Christian Darrisaw back as a clear-cut top 5 to 7 offensive tackle in the league. I mean, there's no doubt off of his tape at this point. Like, this dude, athletic traits, nasty in the run game, great technique as a pass blocker. It checks every box. Like, nobody really questions whether or not Christian Darrisaw is essentially an all-pro level talent when healthy, but that's been the what if on him. So there's no real reason to think that he can't make that, utilize the full recovery time after they did shut him down smartly late last season to just hit the ground running this year. And obviously I wouldn't rank the Vikings 6th for offensive line if I didn't expect a good year from Christian Darrisaw. But whether or not he can be the same and then stay healthy is going to determine so much of the success of not just this offensive line, but the offense at large, because we have seen things fall off pretty steep when he's been out. Now, I do think the Vikings, to be fair, have positioned themselves and been more self-aware that Christian Darrisaw has some durability concerns. They've positioned themselves to maybe stomach a Christian Darrisaw injury better now than they have in years past. They have two options here to kind of sort through, two kind of, in many ways, like unproven commodities. You've got Caleb Tiernan, a 3rd-round pick out of Northwestern, who to me was drafted around the right range. He's super tall and lanky and athletic, and the sheer concept of him leads to him being a pretty good pass blocker. Like, he's just really challenging to get around. I think the more lengthy bull rushers will be able to get into his chest and drive him back. And he doesn't really gain that leverage and move guys around in the run game. I do think he could be a decent wide zone blocker, just kind of getting wide and athletic and staying square. But overall, like, I saw Tiernan as a really nice career swing tackle option that's pretty unlikely to be a quality starter, but I like that the Vikings targeted that as kind of a need. Like, maybe, okay, if we need 4 games from Caleb Tiernan, which has kind of been the average on Christian Darrisaw, like ACL aside, he's had other injuries. He's missed seemingly about a month every season of his career. If that's going to be the case, I think Tiernan can step in and hopefully be a nice Band-Aid there. And then Ryan Vandemark was the guy they went with before Tiernan was available in the draft where they were picking. And Vandemark, same idea, athletic, tall guy. They clearly have a type in that sense, where the physics of him to get in the way would work. And he has gotten some spot starts for the Buffalo Bills, who do a really good job at developing offensive linemen. And you've been able to see some noticeable improvements to his efficiency across the board. So he was definitely someone the Bills tried to keep, obviously, but it reached a point where they were like, well, I think the Vikings ended up paying him about $4 million, I think. Yeah, it was $4.27 million on that tender. The Bills ended up losing that kind of contract battle there as the Vikings poach him. But you have a couple of fascinating guys that as they kind of compete for that backup tackle role, I think you'll have better swing tackle play than they've really gotten here, which is nice. I like that as a floor, even if you're counting for a few games missed from Darrisaw. I think that bakes in nicely as a cushion. And that's kind of your left tackle discussion. You go through the rest of this group, and it's pretty damn good. You've got Donovan Jackson, who was their 1st-round pick last year. I think was just as advertised as a rookie, where he was always a high floor option. I still think he's not the biggest guy. He's not the strongest guy. He's got pretty good feet. He's relatively athletic. He projected always as a starting caliber NFL offensive lineman. It's not like he didn't take his losses. There's definitely a few moments against some good pass rushers where he gets knocked in the chest and he goes flying backwards, which was some of the bad tape when he had to play at tackle at Ohio State. Like, there's limitations to him in a sense, but he's really tough. He's, for a young player, he's technically sound. There should be some improvements there. I don't know that Donovan Jackson's going to evolve into like a Pro Bowl caliber guard, but I think they're pretty comfortable with what he is, as hopefully will kind of land as the third or fourth best offensive lineman on this team. Can argue if that was a slight overdraft, but he's here, right? And they're not going to really complain about that. Now, there is one bit of an eyesore at center in Blake Brandel. I'm going to circle back to him and finish on a low note and stay positive here, because you do have Will Fries, who I think at this point, like Donovan Jackson, did they pay him a lot of money to get him over here? Yeah, they absolutely did. But are they really going to complain about it when they're sitting here with another like really just solid, adequate guard who maybe, when they signed him, they looked at the 1 year in Indy where he was surrounded by just like excellent O-line coaching, excellent players around him. He had this kind of monster start to his season before breaking his leg. And, part of the contract was the what if he comes off that broken leg and looks like a, Pro Bowl type of guard who is relatively athletic, played his college ball at Penn State. He's not a nobody of a prospect that like broke through later in his career. It kind of came back to earth a little bit. Like, you saw him take his losses. He wasn't necessarily dominating on the ground like he was when he had a healthy Ryan Kelly and Braden Smith next to him in Indy, but he was still good, right? So, like, sure, did you overinvest in Donovan Jackson and Will Fries a little bit? Yeah, sure, but at least you invested in offensive line, right? So you're in a pretty good spot with those guys at guard. And then you got Brian O'Neill, who's just an ass kicker at right tackle. He's sustained his play consistently as a top, I would say, 5 right tackle in the NFL. His development trajectory has been a model for a lot of like day 2 athletic offensive linemen, where he's filled out, he's developed his technique. He doesn't lose to the bull rush like he did younger in his career. That play strength is translated with his athleticism in the run game. Brian O'Neill's freaking awesome, right? So that 6th overall ranking for the offensive line definitely stems from those 4 players that we've talked about. Now, you do have a center that you are just praying will not be a weak link, right? It's a weak link position. And if you're going to have a weak link, at least in terms of pass protection, center is the best place to have it, because you can almost always give that guy support. You can still, if you're a good defensive coordinator, though, like find ways to isolate any weak link, even if it's a center. So you're just hoping Blake Brandel can be okay as a center. And I would say, to call it a coin toss of him being okay versus being a liability, that might even be generous. I'm not a huge Blake Brandel fan. Like, just the concept of a 6'7" center alone is really foreign. We've seen more taller guys slide in and play guard, but it's even more different as a center where you're snapping the ball and then you got to find leverage. You're in the very heart of the offensive line. Obviously, he's going to have to be a trendsetter just to be okay as a center at his height, because it really is just a leverage problem, right? These defensive tackles who tend to be shorter than edge rushers get up and under your pads, especially if you're a little bit later getting there, because you got to snap the ball. And in the case of Blake Brandel's case, like, he's not necessarily comfortable snapping the ball. It's a new concept for him. He had some bad snaps last year when he stepped in and played it. Now, he does have an offseason to get more comfortable with snapping, get on his guy quicker, call out blitzes and stunts more often. He's got more time now with Will Fries and Donovan Jackson next to him. That's the hope, right? Is an offseason with this as the plan can help you land as him being just okay as a Band-Aid center option. Because for what it's worth, he's shown at other positions like he can be a functional member of, at times, what's been a really good offensive line. But there is more on his plate to make that work at center. So he is the other wild card here. And I did put the yellow arrow on him with a 68 rating. I don't think his upside is too high as a center. I really don't. I don't think his upside at any position is terribly high, but I think he can play above that slightly. But there's a downside to this equation too, where he's like a turnstile in there. Will be certainly fascinating to see how he plays, and then your answers behind that would be like Michael Juergens, who has yet to really win the favor of this coaching staff, Joe Huber, who's played a little bit but played very poorly, and Gavin Gerhardt, who was a 7th round pick out of Cincinnati, who I didn't get to his tape. He was a little bit more off the radar, and maybe they found some diamond in the rough out of Cincy there and Gavin Gerhardt. That'd be phenomenal, and it's not impossible. A lot of starting centers in the league were mid to late day 3 draft picks. And then maybe another option would be either Donovan Jackson or Will Fries, maybe give it a go at center. And like, you don't really have a lot of other guard depth, but maybe Walter Rouse could be more of a guard. Like, I still think like Juergens and Gerhardt are more centers. Juergens probably could play both, but he just really hasn't looked that good. Walter Rouse, to me, screamed kick him inside as a tackle prospect. He's kind of that mauler that just doesn't really have great feet. I still think there maybe could be something there, or maybe Vandemark could try some guard, something like that. Maybe you try to get a little creative there, but it's, you gotta find a way to get some decent center play here, man. I don't think it's going to derail this offensive line, obviously. I do have them ranked as my 6th ranked O-line. There's a lot of good here, and there's a lot of situations like this in the past, frankly, where you look at it on paper and you're like, oh my God, they have no proven center, and they just figure it out, right? It can be done. A fascinating breakdown of the Vikings offensive line that obviously has quite a lot of talent to uplift this thing and work with, just as the overall offense does. This is a unit that obviously has superstar talent to leverage, but clearly some things to work on as well. They got to get those green lights at quarterback, man. I'm optimistic that we could see it, but I obviously can't rank Kyler too high, and I still think ranking them 20th at quarterback is showing my fair share of respect there as a baseline heading in. And then the other big thing is like the run game coaching with Mike Smith coming in. Can they be more creative? Can they implement the QB run game on top of that? Use some of these extra blockers that they have now with guys like Jawan Jennings and Bredesen. That could be really fun as well. If everything comes together, I think this can push being a top 10 offense in the league. I really do. Right now, as I rank these teams and units and players closer to their floor, I have them as the 17th offense in the league, which is still very good, but technically in the bottom half of the league. But with that said, let's talk about what sort of defensive support this interesting Vikings offense is going to be getting here this year. And I obviously have the utmost confidence in Brian Flores, as I already discussed. But let's take a look at this roster, because there is some change up here. There really is, especially when you look at the defensive line that has in many ways been flipped around and downgraded on paper, certainly. So with the interior D-line, they do say goodbye to those 2 veterans they gave a bunch of money to, Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. And I had a hard time color coding these guys because I think both individually are probably somewhere between where I consider a moderate loss and a big loss. I think each individually could be stomached as a loss, but the 2 together, I guess, is a big loss. Like, they were still good players, if not what they were in their prime. And then their additions, you're really counting on that big dice roll on Caleb Banks, one of the more volatile players in this draft, who I'll continue to talk about here. Obviously, a big addition, but he's got some decent sized shoes to fill there, obviously. And then they do spend that 3rd round pick on Big Citrus, Dominique Orange. So it's not like they did nothing there, but I do think it's going to be tough for a pair of rookies there to come in and upgrade that group. I still said slightly downgraded as opposed to like full on bad downgrade. And there's a chance for these 2 rookies to potentially fill those shoes and maybe even be more of an upgrade. But I did say slightly downgraded with the interior of the D-line. And then at edge, they trade away Jonathan Grenard, which is a big loss. Like, Jonathan Grenard's freaking awesome, man. And it's not like they got that much in return for him. That was largely just a contract dump. So Brian Flores is kind of back to, in many ways, not all the ways, but in many ways, like when he took over here, where they didn't have a ton of D-line talent. And Flores had to really dip into his bag with the blitzes and the scheme to help beef up this pass rush and how they schemed up the run defense as well. So as we take a look at this defensive line, they do come in ranked closer to the bottom of the league, 27th to 29th, with a C+ grade for overall D-line. It gets them 24th to 28th for pass rush, right in that same range, 22nd to 25th for D-line run defense. Now, it's not that they have nobody here. There are some talented guys here, and there is upside here with some exciting players that we'll talk about here. But let's start at the edge. And I'm actually going to start with Dallas Turner, because he is a huge wild card for this team, a first-round pick in 2024 who was definitely placed on a developmental trajectory to be behind Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard, and he is the reason that they traded Jonathan Grenard away, is that they are betting on Dallas Turner taking that leap and in many ways continuing to build off of the really encouraging signs he showed, especially in the back half of last season. And I am impressed by the leap Dallas Turner took. He did remind us last year why he had so much hype coming in. And he was like the favorite for defensive rookie of the year in his draft. And I said in that deep dive, like, do not bet that. Like, he's not going to play that much. That's stupid. But he was that high in the odds because of how people talked about him pre-draft. By some, he was considered the best defensive player in that draft class. A draft class that had Jared Verse and Laiatu Latu. And Dallas Turner was always behind the developmental curve of players like that. But Turner does have freaky athletic ability. He reminded us of that last year with his first step, his just quick power, the shock in his hands. That was really encouraging to see from him last year, because he can speed rush, right? And his traits plus some of that Alabama coaching, like, he's been a pretty decent run defender. He definitely has room to get better there. I think he picked off Geno, right, in Seattle, dropping into coverage. Like, you always were able to look at him in a Brian Flores defense and be like, yeah, he's athletic enough to drop into coverage and cause some of that confusion. But does he have the power element to complement maybe a speed rush style pass rushing approach? And last year, I think he really began to show us that, yes, it's in there. And that play strength has ramped up for him. And that's really exciting. So, like, if you just look at what he did last year and see a high motor freak athlete with an incredible first step that alone can get him pass rush wins, and then he starts to bull rush some guys, and now you're looking at him like, okay, can he now start to stem some of this together? Can he develop more of a pass rush approach and repertoire? Then we're really in business with Dallas Turner. He undoubtedly has the upside of a true number one rusher, and he could hit that this season. And they're hoping that can happen. I don't think it's impossible either. I think he's a really exciting player for this year, but he's got to go out and get it done and prove it and reach that next level, undoubtedly. But he, to me, is where this thing all centers. Because you have Andrew Van Ginkel, who's a really nice player. He's honestly a really nice number two at this point in his career, but we know what he is. He's someone that played a lot of off ball, that converted to edge, and has crafted a really nice pass rushing skill set for what he's got. He's crafty with his hands. He's got decent bend. He's a high motor player. He's going to get his pass rush wins, and now he is definitely locked in as that true edge type after being more of a hybrid player for a long time. And he's an incredible run defender. He's got some of the best instincts to find the ball of any defensive lineman in the league. And then you have to throw up just the extra coverage ability for him that you wouldn't for pretty much any other edge player. Paired with Brian Flores and all of the chaos behind this scheme, that linebacker background and the instincts that he has, and honestly the hands that he has, is real. It feels like every year you're just waiting for him to either drop back and pick off a screen or jump something in the flat, like, and get that Andrew Van Ginkel signature pick six. But it's not just those big plays. Like he's a real part of what they do schematically, and it has to bake into how he just kind of helps things in general. You at least have to mention it. So, him plus hopefully an evolved version of Dallas Turner can definitely be enough, and definitely be enough to supplement the loss of Jonathan Grenard. But if Dallas Turner doesn't take another step, you are going to be missing that more legitimate go get you a pass rush win type of guy, which Grenard was for this team. So that's going to be big, especially because there's nobody else. I mean, this, just like the wide receiver depth here, some of the worst edge depth I've seen. I mean, you're talking about a pair of young undrafted types, Bo Richter and Chaz Chambliss. Bo Richter out of Air Force had some good moments against the run. Chaz Chambliss, no related to Trinidad Chambliss, by the way. Chaz played at Georgia. But just like not what you really want to, let alone count on, like even really see on the field. And that lack of depth really is why I think we're going to see a decent amount of Jake Golday actually as a part of this edge rotation. I think we're going to see Golday all over the field in different linebacker formations, and certainly as that on-ball linebacker, as a backup to Andrew Van Ginkel, as a like running mate to Andrew Van Ginkel. Like, you can take Dallas Turner off the field and kind of have two of these guys. And that's the role that Golday actually really, I mean, he played all over the field at Cincinnati, but he played largely like edge and slot corner in Cincinnati's defense. He was such a weird projection, Jake Golday, because of the role he played. And I think that's probably why Brian Flores really likes him. So I would imagine with Flores's history of using guys like this, that we're going to see some Jake Golday on the ball playing some edge for this team. And I definitely would be more confident in his ability to make an impact, especially as a run defender, but even as a pass rusher, where Golday had some speed to power ability. Like, there's a non-zero chance that he just goes the Andrew Van Ginkel route and just fully becomes the long-term replacement for Andrew Van Ginkel. Because it's not like that was always the plan for Van Ginkel either, right? It just proved that he was better there. So there's a non-zero chance that works. I know they like maybe his developmental potential to be like the Blake Cashman replacement. It could really go in a lot of different directions. But I'd be pretty surprised if we don't see Jake Golday playing some edge, especially in that rookie season, where that's how you're going to get him on the field, where he's got some of the linebackers, as we'll see, already ahead of him. And then the other thing, like with the edge conversation, is I mentioned it in the scheme breakdown, but they did start to get into some of those like 4-3 odd fronts, where you're actually going to have more of that hand in the dirt, kind of like the Trey Flowers, Dietrich Wise type of like big end in those Belichick style fronts. We'll see some of that here, as well as a part of the edge depth with Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, Tyler Batty, who's like a undrafted big-bodied edge out of BYU, and maybe a little bit of Isaiah Loudermilk potentially. But they're also in the mix as like early down edge base defense help for run support, especially. So it gets the hybrid nature of this front gets a little bit wacky with who's an edge, who's an interior D lineman. But that does kind of round out the edge conversation. And then you go to the interior D line, and at least like you can stand on Jalen Redmond, who really fully broke out last year. It wasn't a huge surprise to Vikings fans. Like, when he had gotten on the field, he had showed that, like, look, like, played at Oklahoma, crazy athlete. Clearly Flores had a plan for how to use this guy. Once the playing time ramped up, it was like, yeah, he's a problem. He's got great first step. He's rocked up. He's got great instincts. He's got a bull rush. He flies to the ball. He's not the most perfect, most technically sound player, but he's a legit piece. Like, he would be starting for most defensive lines in the league and does a little bit of everything for you. And it's just an athletic problem that's a good piece for Flores to leverage. So you do have that as a foundation, but everything else is really up in the air after that. I mean, Caleb Banks as a first-round pick is a tremendous wild card and was always going to be that no matter where he got drafted. First round, third round on a Vikings D-line that needs him, or on, a loaded D-line, because Banks had some of the most like ridiculous high-end play. If you were just highlight reel scouting and trying to draft the first round off of it, Caleb Banks goes in the top 10 of the draft. And it ultimately didn't lead to him falling that far, right? Even despite the foot injuries, he still goes with the 18th pick to the Vikings, right? because of this dude's upside, I put it down, and I think most people agreed. If things work here, this is a Chris Jones type of player. Just an absurd athlete in between the tackles that just overwhelms dudes. He's too quick off the ball. His raw power paired with like a decent use of his hands with the bull rush. He's got some like pass rush moves. He can swim over the top of you because he is taller. But he's got that same thing that like Deone Walker had that I loved, that Chris Jones has, where like even if his pad level comes up, he is still just like so naturally strong that the normal tall defensive tackle that tries to get away with what someone like Caleb Banks can do will get up under your pads and shock you and knock you back and throw you off balance. But the same way we talk about contact balance for a running back in that sense, Caleb Banks has that as a 6'6" uber athletic defensive tackle. So guys try to punch him, but he doesn't go anywhere. He just plays through that contact and finds his way to the quarterback. Now, as a run defender, when he's pushed backwards a little bit more, it was more inconsistent in terms of holding up against blocks, being a true nose tackle, you know, just as Chris Jones has in his career. He hasn't always been the best run defender. He's gotten better at it throughout his career. But this was a swing at upside, right? A player that, frankly, ended up having to get drafted later than his talent would indicate because of foot injuries for a tall, heavy freak athlete. A scary preposition for Vikings fans who are fans of a team that have taken a lot of injury risks on guys, and the Minnesota sports curse does not pair well with that. There's a fear factor in so many ways. The fear factor of what if he's great, and the fear factor of what if he never plays a fucking game for the Minnesota Vikings, right? Like, that is a self-explanatory wild card, but his tape gets me quite excited. And I think he was, in my opinion, mischaracterized as a raw player. I think his game works. I think he's going to translate if he can get on the field, but that is a big if, based on the fact that he's had multiple foot injuries, and one of them happened working out in the pre-draft process, not even with pads on, like taking on athletes, hitting them. Like, it's who knows how much playing time we're going to get from Caleb Banks, but if he can stay healthy and get out there, because he was injured at the point of getting drafted, look out. Like, that type of player is exactly what this defense needs, and is something that Brian Flores could absolutely leverage, to the point that, like, I do think Caleb Banks could actually be a defensive rookie of the year type of candidate. And I don't know what his odds are. That might not be the worst bet to make, but I do believe, if healthy, he was one of the best defensive players in this draft, no doubt. So I did like the pick more than others, but there's definitely things to be critical of for taking that big of an injury risk that high in the draft. But after Caleb Banks, I don't know that there's too much to get excited about. You've got Levi Drake Rodriguez, who was a 7th round pick, who's done a good job to kind of develop into a rotational role. I don't think he's a bad player. I think he's, at worst, a nice early down rotational guy that can do what is asked of him and be a part of that depth. Maybe he continues to grow and surprises us. That's probably pretty unrealistic. Tyron Ingram Dawkins, to me, is, yes, athletic, but would fall into that tweener category. And 99 times out of 100, those tweeners can kind of be profiled as nice pieces, but capped in terms of upside. And that's kind of my expectation there. Not that he's useless. Like, he started to get into the mix last year and showed some, as a rookie, that he can get out there and have some impact plays scattered every couple weeks. The upside here would come in Dominique Orange, big citrus, if you will. And I kind of felt like I saw Dominique Orange a little differently than was typically discussed with him. Like, obviously, the combination of the nickname and his size and the fact that he did play nose tackle at Cincinnati, I think a lot of people profiled him as like, yeah, he's going to be that big nose tackle that you drop in the middle of your D-line, and he commands a gap and plays with discipline and kind of does that thing. That's not his play style. He definitely played more like he wanted to get upfield or was asked to get upfield. And for a big guy, he had a good first step, and he actually played like more of a penetrator in the run game and, more of a ballistic missile without a targeting system as a pass rusher. I actually think year one, That's probably how Brian Flores is going to get the most use out of Big Citrus, is just set him straight in front of the center and say, blow this dude up. We're going to have twisters and loops and blitzers coming in behind you, but we got to create like chaos for the quarterback where he has nowhere to step up. I actually think that is what his day one impact is. He actually was really unbalanced, like physically unbalanced, ended up on the ground a lot, leaned into guys, didn't really play the run with proper technique. A lot of times he's either on the ground or his head is into his opponent's chest and offenses are running right by him. You can fix that technique. I don't know if that gets fixed overnight, and he is like this really nice impact that can do a little bit of everything for you as that big guy in year one, or if it takes more time. I do like him, just how he could potentially drop into the mix with everything we said about Caleb Banks, Jalen Redmond being that athletic, more, lighter, undersized guy. A best case scenario for Dominique Orange is something you could get pretty excited about here. I just don't know how quickly they're going to find that. So clearly there's upside here, right? Especially with Dallas Turner, Caleb Banks, and Big Citrus. Highly drafted dudes, pair of first-round picks and a recent third-rounder there, and even Jake Golday, if he plays some edge here, you could throw into that equation. Largely unproven for the most part, and now they got to go out and get it done with a really good defensive coach, hopefully putting these guys in the right places to succeed. But as I rank these players and these units at their floor, obviously that's how the Vikings end up a good bit lower in the defensive line rankings. Again, they came out 27th to 29th for overall D-line. But let's go to the next level at linebacker. And as far as offseason changes, the only thing that shows up there is going to be Jake Golday, who obviously could have been in the mix as an edge there, but it wouldn't have overridden the loss of Jonathan Grenard and made it anything less than a downgrade anyway. But yeah, he's obviously kind of a unique hybrid addition here to the Vikings that I listed at linebacker. But because his playing time is so much up in the air right now, I actually just said neutral as far as whether they got better or worse or stayed the same at linebacker, at least for now. But that's not to say that this isn't a really good group of linebackers. The Vikings came in pushing top 10, tied for 10th, really 10th to 13th is the tier they're in for overall linebacker, and just B grades across the board. It's a really nice balanced unit. So 12th to 16th for run defense for linebacker, and 6th to 9th for linebacker coverage. So they are inside the top 10 for LB coverage. And yeah, you really do have a little bit of everything here. You've got Blake Cashman at the top of it all, who does need to stay healthy. Like, this has always been Blake Cashman's thing, is durability concerns. They do have some depth to stomach it for sure, and more depth now than they ever have. So that's good. But there's a good chance you're going to be without Blake Cashman for like a month. That's just kind of the story with him. But God, when he's out there, probably doesn't get enough credit as one of the 10 best linebackers in the NFL. I know ESPN just polled like NFL GMs and stuff, and I don't think Blake Cashman made the top 10. I don't think he even got an honorable mention. Like, that's crazy to me. Blake Cashman, to me, clearly one of the 10 best linebackers in the NFL. He's one of the smartest guys in terms of breaking down the run game, navigating zone coverage. He plays with a relentless motor. He can get off blocks. He's strong. He's a great blitzer. He can overpower backs. He's got like legitimate moves and bend. There's nothing Blake Cashman can't do. It's just his durability, I think, has held him back from maybe climbing to that final tier of being a true superstar. But in a league that doesn't have a ton of definitive top 10 linebackers, it's not hard for me to watch Blake Cashman tape and know what a top 10 linebacker looks like. So when he's out there, he's a huge asset for this defense. And then they found something in Eric Wilson, and just a little pat on the back for me. Last year, I called out how underrated of a signing he was and that Green Bay was going to miss him. And he had a career year for the Vikes last year. So much so that he just kind of outright beat out Avon Pace, who's been a fun undrafted pickup for this team. He's not bad depth for this team to have, Avon Pace. But Eric Wilson, another example of an athletic, in Wilson's case, undrafted linebacker, but someone that had his struggles earlier in his career, ended up bouncing around the league, and then finally 6 or 7 years into his career, someone gives him a chance and he proves that he's made it work and he's developed at this oh so hard linebacker position, especially from a run defense standpoint. Like, he plays like every snap is his last. He clearly gets it in terms of run keys. I think he can step in as a leader of this defense when Blake Cashman's hurt. He's also a great blitzer. Even though he's a little bit older, he's still quite athletic. And they doubled down on him, man. They gave him a 3-year, $23 million contract extension that kicks in this year. So, like, he's a real starting linebacker. He's not a superstar or anything. And from a coverage perspective, it's, he's okay-ish. That's not really where he stands out. He's made a couple nice plays in the ball, but he's taken his losses when teams have targeted him as well. But that's like legit LB2 money, right? Like $7 million a year. And I think he's going to live up to it here and slowly kind of age out within a few years. And then you also have to bring up Josh Metellus just because of how they use him. He played about a third, actually a little more than a third of his snaps as a linebacker between the tackles. So they'll do this in different ways, right? Like, sometimes if Cashman's out, he'll play a little bit more in that 5-1 package. They'll get into that type of package that we broke down in the coach and scheme breakdown, next to Eric Wilson. When it's, a true third and pass situation, he'll come in and maybe Eric Wilson will come off the field as long as Cashman's healthy. So they'll find different ways to get him into that dime linebacker role that he's really good at. He's a better cover player as a dime linebacker than he is as a true safety. He's not as good of a run defender relative to safeties than he is as a linebacker, but he's also a great blitzer and all the different ways the Flores can get creative. You got to mention Metellus, especially, kind of helping compensate some of those weaknesses that Eric Wilson might have in coverage, especially would be maybe one way to look at it. But he's just overall needs to be mentioned as a part of the linebackers here. And then you have Avon Pace, who's definitely kind of flatlined after a really breakthrough as an undrafted rookie. He's one of the more memorable undrafted rookies of the last 5 years or so. But he's really kind of showed that he's a one-dimensional player. He's so small, and he's really just a see-ball, hit-ball, instinctive little jitterbug type of linebacker. And that really shows as a blitzer, where he's got legit pass rush moves. When he's out there and he blitzes, he's a weapon for Flores. But there was a point in time where he was a starter because he was so good at that role. But in time, it's really been revealed, he has no range in coverage. Even if he's fast, he doesn't really flow with traffic, and just, there's no length. He's out of position. He might be a step or two away, but he just doesn't have the recovery ability to get in a position. He's been a liability in coverage, and his size certainly makes him a volatile run defender. So he's more of oh shit, Blake Cashman's hurt. Let's just plug in someone that's going to find a way to make some plays for us as a decent, fun backup. But they've gone about kind of replacing him as a full-time starter. Even if they did, I think, make an effort to keep him around by picking him as a restricted free agent tender, which was 1 year, $3.5 million. And then you draft Jake Golday, who's, kind of a wild card for the future projection here. We talked about him a little bit. He spent so much time playing out in space that projecting him to a real NFL off-ball linebacker role was virtually impossible. He's pretty good at taking on blocks. He's a naturally gifted blitzer. He moves well in space, but has a lot to learn in terms of true coverage drops, because the majority of times he dropped into coverage, it was either from an actual slot corner position, which is impressive that he was able to do it out in space, but it is different. You have to read a lot more in a mid zone in the middle of the field than just a curl flat, where you're usually just reading out one to two and making a decision. It's just different in a linebacker assignment, or dropping into coverage into a similar spot from the edge. So really difficult tape to project, but he's got a bit of an it factor to him. He's crazy athletic, and he's kind of halfway in between what Leo Chanel was and what Peyton Wilson was coming out of that same system in Cincinnati. Peyton Wilson just hasn't been strong and physical enough to be consistent in the league. Jake Golday's got a little bit more nastiness about him. I think I like him more than I like Peyton Wilson. So I'm a believer. I think Flores is going to figure this thing out one way or another, whether it's at linebacker or at edge. I just don't know how much that year one impact's going to be. And you can definitely see, like, okay, Cashman, 30 years old, injury history. Eric Wilson's 31, 32, 3-year extension. Metellus is doing his thing, but he's even getting older. You can see, like, a couple years down the road, there's path for him to become a linebacker here. And like we said, there's ways to get him on the field as an edge. And that really wraps out your linebacker room. So it's a fun unit. I think this is one of the deeper, more talented units. You don't have that definitive superstar. And I wish I could rank it a little bit higher and count on Blake Cashman being out there every single game. It's probably a slight ding in the final ratings there, but it is definitely a strength of this defense, relatively speaking. But let's go to the last position group of this defense with this secondary. And they did have a relatively busy offseason in their secondary. So at cornerback, they say goodbye to Fabian Moreau, who played a rotational role for them. But a couple additions. They bring in James Pierre as a nice budget addition as a free agent who will be in the mix as a quasi-starter here. And then they draft a really fascinating developmental project out of Stephen F. Austin in the 5th round in Charles Demings. So I said slightly upgraded at cornerback there. Now at safety, there's definitely some moving pieces here because Harrison Smith may or may not retire. He's not currently on the roster. It really just comes down to whether or not he wants to do this at age 38. 37. He would be 38 if they were to play in a Super Bowl in what would almost certainly be his final season then. But yeah, wouldn't be surprised if he rejoins this team, in which case you're obviously like staying neutral with some interesting additions here. But looking at Jacoby Thomas, a 3rd-round pick out of Miami that I personally wasn't particularly high on. Jacob Thomas as well. Not the same person. Also a notable priority free agent ad here out of James Madison. So obviously, yeah, like if Harrison Smith is not going to play here, I think on paper it's slightly downgraded. Not that Harry is like anywhere close to what he was in his prime, where I'll go to the table and defend him as a Hall of Famer personally, but still a good player and a veteran member of the secondary. So like he is definitely a loss as we start to look at this thing. But as we break down the secondary here for the Vikings, this year I have a really big cluster in the middle of the league for secondary. It wasn't intentionally done that way to like avoid having strong opinions on ranking these secondaries or anything like that. I have like grade slots that I give all these teams for the purposes of this series, and there just happened to be 9 secondaries in the NFL that came in with this kind of C+ mark of secondaries that are just kind of solid, some of which have more upside to transcend that, some of which might have a few more, question marks and red flags and that kind of stuff. And the Vikings are like firmly in the middle of that cluster, which is 16th to 25th in the league for DB coverage. Yet they do get really good run support from some of these guys that we'll talk about. So that is kind of a tiebreaker in the middle of that cluster, which lands the Vikings overall secondary 17th to 18th for me, if that all makes sense. But let's get into these guys individually, and we'll start as we usually do at cornerback. And at least as far as corner is concerned, this to me feels like as stable as Brian Flores' cornerback situation has felt since he's come in here. This has been one of the weaker cornerback rooms in the NFL. They do have Byron Murphy, who they added to this group several years ago, and he didn't follow up his 2024 season, which was the best year of his career. He had a bunch of picks, probably made a Pro Bowl, because that usually coincides with interception numbers and fan votes. Outside of the picks, I think Byron Murphy has largely been very consistently who he is. It's just when he gets one year where quarterbacks make some mistakes and he ends up with the ball in his area and opportunities to make picks more often, you're going to think higher of him, right? But overall, Byron Murphy is a very steady, balanced cornerback, and to me has been that since he came into the league. with the Arizona Cardinals. He's got decent size. He's not the fastest guy. He's usually better in kind of an off zone type of setup where he doesn't have to be in run and chase mode all the time, but he's got enough man coverage ability. But overall, you can expect relatively steady coverage from him, and certainly not lockdown coverage from him either, and not dominant run defense on top of that. One really nice benefit of Byron Murphy is that he has easy inside out flexibility. I think he is just about interchangeable in terms of saying he is just as good as a slot corner as he is as an outside cornerback. And some of that quick footedness translates really well into the slot there. So with all of the different formations that they use here, you're going to see Byron Murphy inside and out. In true base defense, he will be an outside cornerback, and he'll be an outside cornerback in those 5-1 penny style fronts where Josh Metellus is more of the slot defender. But when you especially talk about more of their true third down defense, which is more of a traditional nickel or dime defense, you very well might see Byron Murphy as their best option as a slot corner. But he's a really solid, I would just leave it as starting cornerback. I'm not going to go as far as saying he's like good enough to be a CB1 in an ideal situation, but he's a really good starter. And then you have Isaiah Rodgers, who came in here last year after, kind of fading away, right? Like he was an early, intriguing day 3 player for the Colts, gets a season-long gambling suspension, made a huge mistake, wasn't sure if he was going to get back into the league, signs with the Philadelphia Eagles, the savvy bastards that they are. He was like the 5th corner on that absurd Eagles Super Bowl defense. And then he ends up getting a nice 2-year, kind of prove-it style contract in many ways with the Vikings. And now he's on the 2nd year of that with an opportunity to like secure generational wealth, really. I mean, he had an awesome season last year. It was a little bit up and down from a coverage consistency standpoint, as is the nature of this position and the nature of, and Isaiah Rodgers, who I don't think anybody's talking about him like a Christian Gonzalez or anything like that, where you're expecting a full season of lockdown coverage. But his speed plays. He's also got great ball skills. Like with a scheme that's going to force quarterbacks to get rid of the ball quickly, you have a pair of really opportunistic corners out here. And Isaiah Rodgers' game against the Bengals last year was one of the most dominant cornerback games that any individual player had on the season. Almost certainly received Defensive Player of the Week for that performance. Honestly, that kind of surrounded more streaky coverage to start his season, but he actually finished more consistent and harder to take advantage of in coverage. And, I think generally speaking, this sort of 78 mark kind of as a Byron Murphy-esque player. Byron Murphy got, a very nice contract extension, close to $20 million a year. I don't know that Rodgers will get quite that much, but generally speaking, like I think Isaiah Rodgers largely will land as about this level of player. I do believe in him. What I'm saying is I think some people might say the up arrow should be on him. Like he's just settling back in and like really establishing himself in the league now. You could certainly make that argument for him as well. I just didn't quite go that route. I think he likely lands, like I said, in a similar range to what we talk about with Byron Murphy, and you have a really nice tandem here. And honestly, at this point, I would say these are the 2 best players of this Vikings secondary. But you're not done after those 2. The Vikings went to the free agent block and found some value here in James Pierre on a 1-year, $4 million contract. And I think if nothing else, like they were able to find someone that can step out there and raise the floor and play and not get just abused in coverage, because the rest of this cornerback depth, as we'll talk about here, it's highly questionable. James Pierre had a really good year last year. He's been in Pittsburgh for 6 seasons after making the team as an undrafted pickup in 2020. And he's had his ups and downs, certainly, and to the point that they looked to replace him with other veterans and draft picks and stuff. And he was placed into a backup role, and that was kind of the end of it, except for last year. They had some injuries and moved Jalen Ramsey to the safety spot, and James Pierre goes out there and he had definitely a career year. I mean, he had some of the best lockdown metrics of any cornerback. Like seriously, he had a 45% reception percentage allowed. He had 10 passes defended to just 16 receptions allowed. Just incredible play last season in about a half a year's worth of sample size. Now, Obviously, we're not expecting that, but that is part of him getting the yellow arrow for me. I mean, he really spent the better part of the 2 prior seasons on the bench, potentially, working on his body, working on his game, just waiting on that next opportunity. Maybe this is a case of a 29-year-old corner that's just making the most of an opportunity and is going to come in here and really impress. I can't rule that out because of how good he was in Pittsburgh last year. It makes him a very fascinating addition. And that's why it was a 1-year kind of prove it contract. Obviously, if he goes back to more of the streaky, more bench-worthy player that he was at points in Pittsburgh, there's the downside of a James Pierre as well. So that's the yellow arrow sort of analysis on him. We'll see what they can get from him and where he kind of lands. Ultimately, I think it was a good signing because they needed another guy that, here in Minnesota, as I've discussed ad nauseum at this point, like they don't play a traditional nickel defense much at all. They play it less than anybody in the league because they were second in the league in base defense with only 4 defensive backs on the field last year. And then even some of their like nickel defenses is with Josh Metellus as the nickel corner, with Rodgers and Murphy as their starters. So like they just need a guy that can play 300 or 400 snaps as their CB3. And I think James Pierre can hold that down for them, if not be like really good. So you put those together, and again, I none of these guys are superstars, but I definitely think this is as good as the Vikings have been at cornerback in the Brian Flores era. Their depth is a concern. You want to keep these guys healthy. I liked Dwight McGlothern for what he was coming out of Arkansas as a day 3 prospect with some good zone instincts and ball skills. And he got on the field as an undrafted pickup last year. There could be something there, and he probably would be the first guy off the bench. Khalif Halasi was viewed as kind of a slot type, I believe. Didn't end up playing last year, but I think made the team or was on and off the practice squad. And then you have a couple of rookie additions to the cornerback room. Charles Demings, a 5th-round pick. Tape was unavailable for me, so I don't have like strong opinions on him, but he definitely fit the mold of someone that you could expect to get drafted just because he's got the classic height, length, speed profile that you want to develop for a corner and produced at a very low level of competition against Stephen F. Austin. So we'll see how that translates, but definitely someone to keep an eye on. He would be the next guy with sort of like intrigue and upside out of this group of backups. And then Marcus Allen as well. I thought he was a relatively balanced player playing in Bill Belichick's defense. Obviously, he's going to be familiar with some of this, some of the lingo here with Brian Flores, the Belichick connections there. Maybe Bill put in a good word for Marcus Allen to get him on the team as an undrafted pickup. But I did watch him, did think he was draftable, so decent enough. Undrafted pickup there as well. But yeah, nothing really to count on in terms of cornerback depth. And then you go to the safety situation, currently without Harrison Smith, of course, who would come in around, like a regressing 77 rating or so. Wouldn't change the grade for me on the Vikings secondary, frankly, but it would just, the floor would be a little bit safer because right now you have really a position battle in Harrison Smith's role. So let's just start there, I guess. It's, to me, going to be between Jay Ward and Jacoby Thomas. Jay Ward was a 4th-round pick in the 2024 draft 3 years ago. And Jacoby Thomas was a 3rd-round pick this year. And I do think Jay Ward realistically should have the upper hand in this, at least in terms of like looking like the better player here in camp. They obviously are going to have the kind of recency push towards, especially because it really was truly an old regime that landed on Jay Ward with Kwesi and that group. Now it's, they've had a lot of turnover with the front office. The GM that made this year's picks is not their current GM, but at least Brian Flores would have recently said, I like Jacoby Thomas. So there's a little bit of a recency bias towards Jacoby Thomas. But I don't know. I like Jay Ward more personally and would kind of bet on him to stand out more. I was not impressed by Jacoby Thomas's tape. Like, yes, he played on that Miami defense, but to me, he kind of felt more like one of those players that was just an okay player that got a little bit more pub because he was on such a great defense and played in so many big games. Like, I don't know, he looked very much like a dime a dozen box safety to me. If anything, I see Jacoby Thomas probably better off developing as a Josh Metellus replacement here. I don't think Jacoby Thomas, if he didn't get to play behind one of the best pass rushes we've seen in college football in a long time and in a bunch of spotlight games, I don't know that he is a third-round pick, right? So, like, there's a lot of buzz with this player. The Vikings clearly like him. And look, I said it when they drafted, like, Mekhi Blackmon back at the time. People were like, how are you going to tell me that this was a bad pick when Brian Flores handpicked this guy? I'm like, well, because I watched his tape, I didn't think he was a very good prospect. And that's how I feel about Jacoby Thomas. We'll see, right? I could easily be wrong about that, but that's my kind of stance on it. I didn't like his coverage, and he's a box safety that missed a bunch of tackles. Like, what is he really offering here right now until he develops? I don't know. To me, Jay Ward also was more of a developmental project at the time of when they drafted him, played a lot of slot at LSU, but clearly had speed and playmaking instincts, kind of in that like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson mold of streaky but explosive kind of hybrid nickel defenders, if you will. And Ward actually got on the field last year doing a lot more of the Josh Metellus stuff. When Metellus got hurt, Ward's opportunities opened up in this secondary. And I thought he played pretty well and did a little bit of everything. He's interesting to me. He really is. And I really like his skill set in the Harrison Smith mold. You have Metellus as that true box role. We'll get to Theo Jackson, but he is the free safety here. Jay Ward, to me, really does exist well in the Harrison Smith role, where you do occasionally need him to be able to rotate and play two shell and have range on the back end, but you also want him more, down in the nickel, hook zones, curl flats, manning up tight ends, like in that sort of safety role. And he can absolutely do that stuff. So I am betting on him more. We'll see how that all plays out. And then you have Theo Jackson. And before we talk Theo, like, there's a chance that Jay Ward takes the free safety job and they go with Jacoby Thomas and Harrison Smith's role. Like, I don't think Theo was so good last year that he's locked in as the free safety if they just feel like he's the fourth best player of these guys. I think Metellus is the one that's truly locked in. But I do think Theo was good in that responsibility of like, okay, you are the true deep safety, you're the last line of defense. Even if you don't make a bunch of plays, like rally, tackle, be that kind of goalkeeper of the defense. He held down that role reasonably well. You never ever really noticed him on the field. Like, he doesn't really take risks or provide any upside on the back end. But if you put Jay Ward back there, you would expose yourself to maybe more busted coverages and missed tackles and that kind of stuff that I just don't know that it's necessary to rock the boat in that sense. And then there is one other name that just kind of is interesting to me, and that is Jacob Thomas out of James Madison. And he, unfortunately, I haven't been able to find like what the injury was or what it really was, but he was not out there for the James Madison Oregon playoff game that might have gotten him more in the spotlight to maybe get himself drafted. But he played well at James Madison. Good run defense, good ball production. I didn't watch his tape, but just kind of getting the sense of the profile there. And he tested off the charts. He's big as well. He's like 6 foot 215. He's really fast. He's got a very fascinating profile to me. I haven't watched him play a snap, so I don't know that he's necessarily good, but he definitely stood out to me and was kind of on my radar as someone that maybe was going to sneak into the back end of the draft. But he definitely would profile as a Harrison Smith role kind of guy if he's got size and athleticism like Harrison Smith does. So definitely someone to keep an eye on. And the Vikings are not afraid to give the opportunity to undrafted players. Take a look at Theo Jackson. So we'll keep an eye on him. Tavier Thomas, more of a veteran, what you see is what you get kind of guy, but not a horrible, insurance piece if everything goes wrong here. I think he could probably play that role too. And then kind of fitting that feels like this whole video we've been hinting at Josh Metellus' role in this defense, and now this is the last player we're going to talk about here roster-wise. But yeah, he's pretty locked and loaded because he provides that unique chess piece that we've talked about so much. He is half linebacker, half safety. So as you would maybe expect, he's a phenomenal run defender. And I mentioned how the Vikings DB run defense grade is above a lot of those teams that are kind of in this more middle cluster of secondaries in the NFL. Josh Metellus is a core reason for that. Like, not only does he have the size, but he's got great block take on ability. He's been a really steady tackler in this role. They also love to blitz him. When we did, to be fair, talk a little bit about him as the actual linebacker. Now, his coverage is not great. And honestly, last year there were some times it felt like he had to rotate deep a little bit more often, just with some of the injuries and no more Cameron Bynum on this team. And you can really see, like, I would think Brian Flores is going to try to avoid any and all situations where Josh Metellus needs to play not only a single high type of role, but like a 2-shell cover 2 or quarters cover 4 type of assignment. He just doesn't move well out in space. He's got decent enough instincts around the line of scrimmage. He's pretty consistently had about 4 or 5 passes defended over the last 3 years, 4 years even. Like, he's got instincts to do, to take out tight ends and do more, honestly, like linebacker stuff as a cover defender. So he's not useless in coverage, but compared to an actual safety, it's not a strong suit in his game. But he is overall a big asset for this team because of the unique skill set he brings to the table and what he opens up schematically for Flores. But I think you get the sense of how this kind of lands. It's just a very solid secondary. I think, however the dust settles with that Harrison Smith replacement, I don't think it's going to derail this secondary one way or another. I think good on whoever wins that job. I trust this staff to, put a serviceable player out there one way or another. And honestly, if Jay Ward and Jacoby Thomas just outright suck, they can just play a base nickel and get away from the 3 safety stuff for a season 2. You've got options there for sure. And it's a very solid secondary to wrap up this defense. So where do I have this Vikings defense as we head into the season? It is just on the outside of the top 10 looking in. And I know it's like heresy to not have a Brian Flores defense top 10. Well, they are very much sniffing it there with that 11th mark. They are very balanced as well. 12th in pass defense, 13th in run defense. If this team finished as a top 10 defense, it shouldn't surprise anybody. But clearly, the roster is not top 10. It's not top 15. Is it top 20? That really shows you how much Brian Flores can elevate this thing. And I think it speaks to my ratings system pretty well that we got pretty damn close with a roster that doesn't blow anybody away, and they still came out as the 11th ranked defense because of the coaching impact that I tried to stress so much at the beginning of this video. But we do have one more side of the ball to discuss, which is the special teams, and they did change punters here in Minnesota. Ryan Wright is going to go down to, New Orleans, and they go with the veteran Johnny Hecker, and that's enough to say slightly downgraded. I don't think it's the end of the world. Switching punters there, obviously, and the Vikings did still come out as my 9th ranked special teams. You have an awesome young kicker in Will Reichard, who's just phenomenal. Of all the kickers that should have gotten drafted higher, I feel like he should have been the one. He's like the all-time college football points leader and was like nails at Alabama. They just didn't think he could kick far enough, and that hasn't even been that big of an issue for him. So he's awesome. Your other specialists, like Johnny Hecker is an aging punter who doesn't grade out all that well. 29th at punter for Hecker. Reichard, by the way, came in as the 9th graded kicker. Just going off the PFF grades there is how I use how I do this for special teams. And then Miles Price returned kicks and punts for them at large last year and looked okay. He's kind of in that middle cluster of you can get by. You got a reasonable return man there in Miles Price. But going off of both the PFF and DVOA team grades, which factors in kick coverage and all the bonus stuff, taking care of the ball, the Vikings graded out really well for special teams last year. PFF had them as the best special teams. DVOA had them 8th. So that definitely is beneficial towards getting the Vikings to be the 9th ranked special teams as we head into the year, and hopefully they can keep that up. So let's do a recap here with my Venn diagram of strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors. And then I'm going to turn to the interview with Arif, and we will circle back after that for more of my true predictions on the Vikings, getting into the schedule and some of my award picks for the Vikes. But as we look at their strengths, weaknesses, and wildcard pivotal factors that are ultimately going to determine the success of the Vikings this year, the Vikings look a little bit different than some of these more recent teams where They actually don't have quite as many question marks for me. Just one true weakness being running back. And even then, it's like, serviceable with Jordan Mason. Like, it's not the end of the world. So like their floor to me is just so high with a true lack of weaknesses. You could argue for defensive line, which did show up as a pivotal factor for me. It's borderline, but there's a lot of good D lines out there. And even though they ranked 27th to 29th, it's still like a very solid C plus grade for me. And I look at them as more of like just not as good as a lot of other D lines, as opposed to that actually being a true weakness. And certainly shows up as a wild card in the sense of like, yeah, if Dallas Turner and Caleb Banks are good, like, it'll be closer to a strength. I don't think they're ever going to be like a top 10 defensive line this year. That'd be a pretty big stretch. That'd be pretty similar to like when the Rams in 2022 had a bunch of concerns and then all those young players just clicked. It would have to be something like that. But it one way or another, it is a wild card. Like they need youth to step up on their D line. But beyond that, really the only like question marks as pivotal factors are going to be the quarterback, obviously. I'm pretty optimistic about what Kyler Murray is going to bring to the table here. I certainly don't think having Kyler Murray as your quarterback makes it a weakness. I think it's more like, could this be a genuine strength and you get top 12 quarterback play this year? I've discussed that that's on the table for the Vikings with Kyler Murray. And maybe JJ McCarthy stuns us too, right? And then the other big one is that offensive line, which does show up as a strength. Like I rank them 6th, but there's a couple factors there that could quickly drop that off, right? Like we kind of took the middle ground on Blake Brendel as a rating. He could be a complete and utter liability. He could be just fine, I think it's close to a coin toss. And then you have the injury situation with Christian Darrisaw. If you hit red lights in both of those categories, the O-line, it could be closer to a weakness, as we've seen at points in seasons past. So that's a big one for sure. But yeah, this team does also have some pretty big strengths. You've got the weaponry. That speaks for itself. I am willing to put the offensive line in there as they're currently healthy. And then the coaching, like, really uplifts this team, man. It really does. So many people want to focus on roster talent. I genuinely believe the Vikings are one of the 3 just best like overall coaching when you take in offensive coordinating and defensive coordinating. So that's a clear strength for the Vikes here. But do not go anywhere. This interview with Arif is phenomenal. You are not going to want to miss it. There's comedy. There's excellent analysis. There's even like 2 minutes of Minnesota Twins talk, which got me excited. So stick around for this interview, and then we will circle back with my final record prediction for the Vikings, as well as my superlative award picks. And now I am super excited to welcome our very first ever inaugural guest, Arif Hasan, back to the Vikings Deep Dive. This is like a tradition for the deep dives at this point. This is like us tapping the Notre Dame sign.
Right,
yeah. Also, you are the first inaugural winner of the free agency draft as well. So congrats on that. I was
honored,
thinking,
honored to slime my way into that win.
Just an incredible piece of content that was, I must say. I was thinking with you and Garrett both on that, we could make like the award, like side award, is whoever has more points gets to do the Vikings deep dive that year. Or the loser has to do it, depending on how. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Anyway, before we do get started, I want you to remind the people where you've got all your hard work and where they can find your stuff, and then we'll start talking some Vikings.
Yeah, for sure. So mostly I just tweet. So you can find that. No, I'm at wideleft.football. It's the website and newsletter that I've been running for the past couple of years. All of my big kind of recurring pieces have migrated over there, like the consensus board and stuff like that. Is X quarterback good? We do that, for 3 or 4 quarterbacks every year. It's been fun. So that kind of stuff. I've got like deep dives on like, is clutchness real? I do industry deep dives and stuff like that. I did not get ahead of the Matt Miller story. That's on me.
Okay.
But it's a ton of stuff over there.
Awesome. All right, let's talk some Vikes. So they made a change at GM pretty early in the process here. And I wanted to kick things off, just kind of getting your thoughts on kind of the timing of how they did things. Because as far as I know, that's the first time a team is just like let go of a GM in January, like right in the thick of the process. I feel like it's usually at the very end of the process or the beginning of the process. Um, but yeah, I'm curious if you had any thoughts on like the timing of it and how it kind of worked out and how it may have had an impact on their offseason, either for better or worse.
Yeah, yeah. Like you said, it is really unusual timing. We do often get GMs fired at the same time a lot of coaches get fired, like the very last game of the season, which, yeah, I guess technically that's in January, but this was in late January, right?
Yeah.
And so he had just come back from the Senior Bowl when he found out he was being let go,
Yeah.
which is nuts to me. That's crazy. So I think that there were like a couple of impacts. It's like, yeah, there was a little bit of disruption in the process by which you evaluate players, but they didn't hire a GM until after the draft, which is another unusual timing element. Usually you let go of a guy, you do like 2-3 weeks of interviews, you hire a guy, right? Even at
Mhm.
GM, like obviously a coach, you do that pretty consistently, but a GM, you tend to do that pretty consistently. And here the Vikings just had an interim GM for a couple of months, one who ran the draft and free agency for them. And I think that that did have a couple of impacts. I think one, it prevents, the team from making really significant big moves, which isn't to say they didn't take a chance in the draft. We'll talk about that. But rather they didn't, make significant trades. They didn't commit to a free agent in a huge way. They did like let go of a couple of like big name players. The interior defensive line is completely revamped because of it. But for the most part, it feels like they were kind of restricted from making gigantic decisions, right? They made big decisions. They didn't make a gigantic decision. You could say grabbing Kyler Murray would be one of those, but like, I mean, he's veteran minimum, right? Because someone else is
It
paying
was
him.
such a no-brainer too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It would have been much more interesting if he hadn't been on the market and they had to like figure out if they wanted, like, are we in the
Mhm.
Geno Smith sweeps or whatever, right? More seriously pursue Aaron Rodgers again. I don't know, right? But yeah, they made a lot of kind of no brainer moves and were relatively quiet. They stuck around where they were selecting in the draft and stuff like that. So I think there was that in terms of how it was conducted, and it also I think changed the search a little bit. One, because some general manager candidates were snapped up pretty early, in the
Yeah.
cycle. And then two, I think that the way by which they conducted themselves during the firing process may have scared off Chad Alexander, who, from my understanding, was their top choice. I know
Mm.
that a lot of people said that that was probably the most well-regarded candidate that the Vikings had interviewed throughout the process. Now, they did hire the second most well-regarded candidate, at least by kind of my understanding of the way that other front office executives and agents looked at these things. But Chad Alexander, I think, was kind of the prize, and he declined to continue the process. And I wonder if that um, had an impact on it, especially because the rumor is, or the strong suggestion is that they got rid of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in order to retain Brian Flores, whose contract had expired, and he was interviewing with a bunch of different teams like the Dallas Cowboys and
Mm.
at least one other team, I forget now. Um,
Washington had him for like
yeah,
defensive coordinator. Yeah.
yeah, and like technically he also had some head coachings, but we were like really thinking about the defense coordinator stuff because the only reason he would move laterally to defensive coordinator is if he had an issue with the Vikings, and
Mm.
that issue, it turns out, according to a lot of people, was Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. He didn't like the general
Interesting.
manager, and so he was out interviewing. They initially retained Adofo-Mensah. Everybody in the building believes that Adofo-Mensah has one more year for 3 weeks. And then they let him go. And within the same week, within 4 days, they announced the re-signing of Brian Flores. So I think that kind of internal politics having a
Interesting.
role, probably also, if I'm Chad Alexander, if I'm the top general manager candidate on the market, I'm not super interested in a situation where I could get fired by not even just a head coach, a coordinator, right? Like,
Yeah,
not for me.
for sure. What have you kind of come to learn about Nolan Teasley as well, who is the new GM, by the way, people? But yeah, what have you kind of come to learn about him, and what do you think might differ compared to how Kwesi kind of ran things there?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, whenever there's a new GM, I think we all say the same things about every new GM for every team. He's going to integrate analytics and traditional scouting.
Right.
He's going to build consensus, right? And the question is like, how genuine can we believe this to be? We thought that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was going to be an analytics GM, and part of my story on his firing, which I think is still one of the featured stories at Wide Left. Was that a
It's your
lot of
website, dude. You should probably know that.
yeah. Well, it's like there's a little featured post. It automatically kind of seeds which ones are the featured posts. I don't know,
Sure,
man.
sure.
But a lot of the analytics people around the league, I talked to a bunch of analytics departments. They were not very convinced that the Vikings were analytically sound in the way that they ran their franchise under Adofo-Mensah. In fact, it was more analytically sound under Rick Spielman. And so this meant how they conducted themselves in trades for the draft, right? They would
Yeah.
constantly be like losing value in their trades relative to other analytically forward organizations. The players that they selected didn't seem to be kind of players that a lot of analytically minded general managers might have valued. There were some principles that they followed. They were pretty, excited about grabbing players on the downswing, especially due to injury. Like that did kind of play out. But for the most part, the acquisition strategy and the way that they conducted themselves wasn't really analytically minded.
Mm-hmm.
And so despite getting a guy who has been in the pro scouting department for the Seattle Seahawks for a number of years, might end up with an organization that is a little bit more analytically minded. He brought a couple of people from the Seahawks that seem to kind of fit that mold. And I think that his job as assistant general manager for the Seahawks has been to effectively coordinate what the analytics department is doing there with what the traditional scouting
Gotcha.
is producing. And so given that was his actual role, I think there's probably something genuine in our ability to project that he's going to actually do that. And so I think this kind of measured approach is the most likely thing that we're going to do. And I also think the kind of the buzzword, the collaboration stuff that people talk about, I think we're probably going to see less of that in a good way. I think it's going to be a more decisive organization.
Mm-hmm.
I know everyone wants to talk about how collaboration is good and stuff like that. It's a buzzword for a reason, right? But I think like at some point your general manager has to be the boss and make a choice.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Kwesi was afraid to do that a lot, and I think here Nolan Teasley will actually just make choices.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense that like you would lean more towards like an analytics oriented guy than like a, old school scout type when you have like, Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores being their personalities. Like they're going to have the guys they want. So you want the guy that can kind of bring the analytics to the table and be like, this is why it's smart. This is why it's not smart.
Yeah.
This is why we're going to do it.
And have the language to communicate that to them.
Yeah.
Like, look, I know that, but when you're grabbing a safety, he's running a 4-2, he's going to do all these things for you a little bit better or whatever. Right.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, I got to ask the big question that everyone's waiting for. Who's the week one starter at quarterback here, Arif?
I mean, it's Kyler. We don't got to play around. It's Kyler. The Vikings have been splitting reps, and they'll start training camp by splitting reps, but it's Kyler.
Yeah. I mean, that's the stance I have as well, but I do know there are definitely people in the JJ camp. I do have some questions about both of those quarterbacks, and since you answered Kyler, we'll start with my Kyler question. And it's the same question I had on JJ McCarthy for you in last year's deep dive. And it's that fun little probability curve question to kind of get your take on what is sort of the 5% best case scenario for what we might see from Kyler. What's the maximum hype train for him? What's the worst case scenario? And then where does that kind of 50% land for him as well?
Yeah, this one's really tough because he comes from a history of offenses that are nothing like what Kevin O'Connell likes to do. His offenses were a lot less complicated. They loved kind of throwing to the outside. They were really static. There wasn't a lot of shifts and motions. And bringing Frank Smith in from Miami, I think we're going to see a lot more shifts and motions. A lot more just like pre-snap, whatever, right?
Sure.
Kyler was in an offense that did ask him to get rid of the ball quickly. Now, he didn't do that, but that's what the offense asked him to do. And the Kevin O'Connell offense is the exact opposite. It wants, you to hold on to the ball a little bit. The routes organize themselves a little bit deeper, so you actually can't get rid of the ball quickly a lot of the time. And so it's really difficult to project. So we'll kind of, in order to comp Kyler to other quarterbacks, we'll ignore what he's done, but I will point out, like, his 2021 season is his best season by far. Best half season, if we're being honest. But
Sure.
he had an above average, but not like eye popping average depth of target, heavy screen volume, which we're not surprised by, heavy deep ball volume, which means there's essentially very little intermediate volume, which we see a lot with a lot of successful quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers, late career Aaron Rodgers, does this a lot, like pretty high deep ball volume, pretty high screen volume, very little intermediate volume. Patrick Mahomes has been doing this a lot recently. Josh Allen did it in 2024. Really great season for him. So it's not like a bad thing that this is what characterizes the quarterback, but like to get a perspective on how different this is. So I looked at 2014 to 2025, right? So like, was that 12 years? Math, I don't know. And Murray's had multiple seasons in the top 40 of all of these quarterback seasons in screen rate over the past 12 years. The Vikings under O'Connell have one top 150 season in screen rate. So their peak screen rate is slightly above average compared to the league. They just don't throw that many screens, and they're bad at them. So I'm glad they don't. but great, right? They pass deep a fair amount, but most of their average depth of target, which is above average for the league, comes from like a lot of these intermediate shots. So it's pretty difficult to model him. I think the most ideal scenario, and I was playing around with filters, and it's really funny, the three I came up with. But the most ideal scenario, 2014 Russell Wilson, played a fair amount of screen game, was always hitting these deep shots, held on to the ball a ton. The offense enabled him to hold on to the ball a ton. There was a bit more play action usage than I expect Kevin O'Connell to deploy. Maybe he'll, with Frank Smith back, maybe we'll see a little bit more play action again. A lot of other quarterbacks in this category, like, late career Aaron Rodgers, they don't hold on to the ball very. Aaron Rodgers holds on to the ball the least, right?
Yeah.
So it's really difficult to find a comp that matches the play style and a really high level of output. But 2014 Russell Wilson is the best example. I think the mid-range outcome is 2021 Russell Wilson. It was his last year in Seattle. He still made a Pro Bowl that year, right? He's pretty volatile. He had a lower interception rate, but he had one of the lowest success rates of his career. He had a superficially high passer rating at like 103. It was like, you go back and you look and you're like, oh, his pass rating was 103. I don't remember it like that. Yeah. But he really just couldn't get things done in the same way. They had like a 6-8 record with him as the starter. They relied way too much on passing to the outside. They'd completely abandoned the middle. They really tanked their ability to solve problems when they appeared. So he would get a lot of and so the thing that we remember most about really good Russell Wilson is he was outstanding in the fourth quarter. It was kind of the inverse here in 2021, where he was like pretty good in the second and third quarter, but like when they needed him to get some stuff done, he wasn't getting done. Yeah. And to cap this off, the low range outcome is 2022 Russell Wilson. I promise I wasn't doing this like because he's like short or scrambles a lot.
No, it makes sense though. It makes total sense though. And that's Broncos Russell Wilson, right?
Yeah, it's probably and it egregiously high sack rate, 10.2% sack rate, which I believe was around the Vikings sack rate last year. Worst success rate of his career, something like 36%, abysmal. A high watermark in interception rate. I believe he had a higher one his rookie year, right? But really high interception rate, really low touchdown rate. The offense was, I think initially they wanted to design it to get stuff over the middle, and then he just wasn't doing it. So they had to, which is what Kevin O'Connell, by the way, did for JJ McCarthy in the final couple of weeks of the season. And it was a disaster, right? So I did try, and these were just like me looking at filters and seeing kind of what felt right. And I landed on Russell Wilson 3 times. If I was looking for non-Russell Wilson guys, I think at the low end, 2024 Caleb Williams. And I know that feels weird because people like that season a lot, but it was only considered promising because of some really highlight moments and the fact that he was a rookie. Yeah. I think for like an 8th-year veteran, that would be a shockingly bad season.
Right.
I have no problem saying the 2024 season for Caleb Williams was promising and had a bunch of good stuff, but we can't pretend that in a vacuum it was like good, right?
Right.
And I think that would be the low end here.
Which is still better than where I was afraid you were going to say, which is like Justin Fields. Any moment of Justin Fields.
Yeah. No, I don't. Yeah.
The floor is not that bad.
I think Kyler's eyes are too fast to play like Justin Fields. I think Fields just like he doesn't see it in time, and
Justin
so
can't
just,
see the fields.
yeah,
That's my nickname for him.
all right. Okay, man. You got to work on that. I I think the high end, you're going to love this one. I know you're going to love this one. Last year's Jordan Love, right?
Okay.
High time
Okay.
to throw, high deep ball rate, reasonably high success rate, like 50%, right? The highest success rate of Jordan Love's career. More usage of the middle of the field, but still not like depending on like meshers and crosses and stuff like that, right? Meshes and crossers. But
You got to
but
work
like,
on that, man.
yeah, I got to work on that. Yeah, got him right. But yeah, like you'll see, and like Kevin O'Connell loves the post. Like he loves it when Justin Jefferson has a middle of the field open post available to him. So does Jordan Love, right? So if Kyler Murray has the ability to kind of hit that, which he occasionally does, especially when it's like DeAndre Hopkins, right? That's kind of the really high end. So if we wanted to avoid all the Russell Wilson comps, then you have Caleb Williams and Jordan Love conveniently all in the division. So, you know, it's easy, I think, to perceive for Vikings fans.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you a little bit about kind of how things went down with JJ, most specifically, like when he came back, because I think that's where people look at and they're like, okay, it was at least like, you know, that the head was maybe above water a little bit more. You mentioned some of the tweaks they maybe made when he came back, but yeah, what do you kind of make of his play when he came back? How much hope did it inspire for you there, or whatever? What did you make of it?
I mean, if he hadn't done that, it would be over. It would be kind of like a Josh Rosen, like, it's been 1 year and then we've seen enough, right? I don't know that it's enough for me to say that there's anything promising, because his best games were against the worst defenses in the NFL, Washington, Dallas, right? Like it was just terrible.
Yeah.
And he was not running an NFL offense. Like it worked for 3-4 games, right? But he wasn't running an NFL offense. They didn't throw to the middle. In fact, I believe if you look at intermediate passes, which is like 7 to 21 yards, right? If you look at intermediate passes in the middle of the field, you know, between the numbers, not just between the hashes, he had one throw over 3 games.
Wow.
Yeah. And that you can't do that. That's not going to work. It worked against one of the worst defenses in the NFL, sure, but it's not going to work against the Detroit Lions, who are like an average defense. And I don't know what the Packers are going to do without Jeff Hafley, but I'm sure it's going to be better than whatever the Washington Commanders put together, right? Like, yeah, the one good year of a defensive coordinator, that's gone. Bye.
Jeff Hafley would be the best defensive coordinator of all time if that was the drop off. But yeah.
But yeah, so those tweaks, I think helped the offense produce, but I don't think they gave us a lot of insight into what the path is for McCarthy to improve, right? Like the Vikings have always, under O'Connell, had the quarterbacks run the ball a long time. We just talked about that, but at least those quarterbacks like got rid of the ball when pressure arrived. Like the thing that you can say about Cousins and Dobbs and Darnold, 3 fairly different quarterbacks in a lot of respects. The thing that they all shared was that they would fire down the barrel, right? Like if a pass rusher is coming up the middle, they're going to throw into it and they get knocked out, right? Which is great. Like that's exactly what O'Connell wants. It's like, oh, you're on the ground. Well, it was a 30-yard completion, right? Do it again. And McCarthy will also stare down the barrel, but then he won't get rid of the ball, right? Like, so he has like this courage that all of these quarterbacks have in the pocket, and then he'll get decked, and now the ball is in the defense's hands, and you're like, all right, man. So, which is one thing that makes the Kyler fit really funny to me, because like, I don't like calling professional football players cowards, right? Because I couldn't do any of that. I would turtle every snap. So like, understand that I'm speaking in the context of other quarterbacks, but Kyler compared to other quarterbacks is a coward. And so I don't know if we're going to see that, but, and maybe that'll change, right? Maybe it was, you know, Cliff Kingsbury was like, please, you're the most important thing we have, run away or whatever. Right. With McCarthy, it was just too much. Like you have to get rid of the ball. You have to scramble maybe a little bit more. And so if we were looking at all of McCarthy's problems, I mean, there's a ton. I don't know which one his biggest problem is. Ball placement was huge. Anticipation was huge. The sack rate problem was huge. Mechanically, there were a lot of issues. We ended up talking a lot about that on Vikings Twitter for like an interminable number of weeks about like leg whip and whatever, right? But he could not figure out how to time his footwork with his throw. And on top of that, he wasn't accurate. So what are we doing?
Yeah.
I don't know that was fixed in the final couple of weeks of the season. I'm glad he can throw a 10-yard out. That's a really difficult throw. A lot of college quarterbacks can't do that, but you got to be doing all these other things too.
Yep. Well said. All right. I want to ask you about Jordan Addison as well. Kind of a polarizing player for sure. Had a pretty down year last year, highest career drop rate. Buzz is probably down on him. I'm curious kind of what your expectations are for him, what you made of last year, because like he's had a lot of off-field knuckleheadedness, for lack of a better term. And I'm curious if you're like really worried that kind of off the field knucklehead is maybe starting to show up on the field a little bit more, or if maybe you would go the other way and say, no, he's going to have a great year with better quarterback play, and that was really the only reason for it.
Yeah, I think it was like 4 years in the league and at least 4 incidents I can name off the top of my head. That's not great, right? Like the 140 miles per hour down a highway and then on a different highway at a different state falling asleep. The getting lost in London, I guess. Like, I don't even know. But he got benched for half the game. Yeah, well, he got benched for half the game. He didn't play the first half of the London game.
Oh, in the London game.
Yeah, and I guess he like missed a team meeting earlier in the week because he like got lost or whatever, right?
It's a big city.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big city, but like, come on, man. I get the cabs there are insanely expensive. By the way, if you're ever in London, don't do the black cabs. They're a fun little tourist feature, but they cost like $200 to get anywhere. It's insane. Just use the tube. But and then the fourth one is like whatever happened in the Vegas thing, which apparently wasn't his fault, but like you think, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
So all of that, right? I don't think the Vikings are tremendously concerned about that from the perspective of whether or not they're going to give him a contract. Now, obviously, they're concerned because they don't want their players to go missing, but I don't think it's really going to impact, the contract.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like as one would be concerned, right? But yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of these wide receiver twos go for like big money. Like Jalen Waddle is a really good example, but we've seen with T. Higgins, we saw it with what is it, like Cortland Sutton. Like we've seen a lot of these.
Yeah, maybe like Alec Pierce, maybe.
Yeah, and I think Alec Pierce is actually maybe a better model than the Jalen Waddle one in terms of trying to figure out where he's going to go contract wise. I would say that the number we're going to see is going to rival some of these contracts. But because the cap expansion has been so much, I think the cap in 2027 is going to be like $330 million. It's going to be a smaller percentage of the cap. So it'll be less of a commitment or investment. Yeah. And I think he's going to have like fewer and guaranteed money because of the off-field stuff. Now, in terms of like his play, I mean, he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season yet, right? I think a lot of people, if they haven't been following the Vikings super closely, are actually a little bit surprised to learn that because he's really well regarded. He's had a 900-yard season. Like, I don't want to say he's like completely out of, but yeah, and some of that is like availability, but like it's like 65 yards a game or whatever, or 62 in a 17-yard season, a 17-game season. So like it's, most receivers can't do that. That's why it's a benchmark. But like, given the expectations that people have and the way that people talk about your play, you should be able to do that. Now, mind you, last year it was pretty hard for anybody to get yards because the quarterbacks were J.J. McCarthy and Carson Wentz and Max Brosmer. Right? Like, I see why you had some issues. And that one's a really difficult season to fully get your head around because you kind of look at it at a global level and say, okay, all these receivers had a lot of drops. So surely the drop rate is unlikely to be caused by all the receivers. It's like a quarterback, right? Like we think of drop rate as a receiver only statistic, but if you can catch the ball here versus having to catch the ball all the way out here, your drop rate's going to increase, right? or decrease if it's here, right? And so like on target throws versus slightly off target throws versus very off target throws will affect your drop rate. JJ McCarthy's one of his biggest problems was a lack of touch. He would just fire it, right? And that'll affect the drop rate too. So I would say that, but then you take a look at all of these drops. Even like Justin Jefferson had a much higher drop rate than he's used to having, and you look at them one by one, and you're like, well, I can see some of this certainly is like McCarthy or Wentz's fault, right? But like all of those receivers should have played better. Like it was tremendously bad in a lot of ways. And I think Addison is not is not immune to this. I think that he had genuinely a little bit of a down year from his own perspective and his own play. I think that they're going to want to see, if he doesn't play every game of the season, whether that's due to injury or like a fifth knuckleheaded moment. I think they're going to want to see something like 60 yards a game before that they really commit to it. But I think that they're anticipating committing to it, because the idea that whatever their plan is at quarterback next year, the idea that they get to slot a quarterback in with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and an offensive line that, depending on Christian Darrisaw, is like kind of good, then that seems pretty appealing, and you kind of want to keep that around.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how does TJ Hawkinson kind of play into that in your mind as well? Because maybe they want to find a world where they get all these guys back, but Hawkinson's kind of regressed, and he's gone.
He's gone.
We can kind of cut that short.
Okay. Yeah. So they renegotiated his contract this year. They cut his pay, and then they added a void year into 2027. That totally signals that he's gone, right? I think a less than 10% chance that they find a way to retain him. Now, if they have a really explosive offense, if Kyler, has like gives him a Trey McBride season or whatever, right? Then sure. But I think one, he's not the athlete that Trey McBride is anymore. But two, not only is that really unlikely because you've got Justin Jefferson soaking up all these targets, I think he's just going to make more money elsewhere. I think he's more well regarded around the league than he might be internally, which I don't think is that the Vikings don't value him, but they did give him a pay cut, right? I think that him being a do-everything tight end, reasonably good blocker, pretty good receiver, the high-end value of that is dropping off. I think the first couple of weeks of the season, we saw a couple of clips go around Vikings Twitter of him being really slow to get out of these choice routes, which is kind of the bread and butter route for, most tight ends and most offenses, but also this tight end in this offense.
For sure.
That looked pretty bad. He did look a lot better following that, but I think that's the kind of enduring feeling that a lot of Vikings fans have of him just being like lumbering to get out of this choice route. I think he's better than that, but I think that it's probably done just because of those contract realities that he's going to hit free agency.
Yeah, definitely just for whatever fan favor matters for these guys. I would say with Julius Randle out of the state now, I feel like TJ Hawkinson may be on the
next one,
the hit list of least favorite Minnesota athletes right now. I don't know. Just has rubbed, I think, a lot.
Well, I can't name a single Minnesota Twin, so I'm forced to believe you.
Hey, tied for the last wildcard spot right now.
Yeah, I've heard that they've been doing way more than they should be. Yeah.
They're actually a fun team, but it's not a Twins podcast. I would love to make it one, but we won't go that route. Just turns into me lecturing you about the Twins for the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, I like Denard Span. What's he up to these days?
He's calling Twins games.
Whoa, that rules! Oh my god, I didn't know that actually.
Him, Trevor Plouffe.
Wait, what?
Glenn Perkins and Justin Morneau did a full series of them just calling the game, and it was elite content.
That sounds outstanding. Oh my god! Yeah. Not a Twins podcast, but the last Twins players I ever cared about all together calling a game. Okay,
it was fantastic. It was fantastic. All right, the last player I want to talk to you about is kind of an offensive focused interview, I guess. But Blake Brandel is supposed to be the starter here. What's your panic meter, 1 to 10, on him being the starting center, and if there's any emergency guys you're excited about?
10 is probably who did the Cardinals have a couple years ago at center before Froholt? I think the Vikings ended up acquiring him too.
Was it God, this is a good trivia question. Was it the former Ohio State?
No. It was I think it was a Michigan center. I'll
Price?
look this up.
Was it Michigan center?
Let's see. I mean, they did have Billy Price. Jesus,
that's who I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's not who I'm thinking of. Mason Cole. That's it.
Yeah.
So like 10 for me is probably Mason Cole. I tell the story all the time, and I've probably told it on this pod. But like, I remember at the Senior Bowl watching Mason Cole snapping the ball, and he was so off target that the guy receiving the snap, like the coach, would just like move to the left. So to make the snaps look better. So he's lined up over the left guard.
Oh my
and that's
God.
where the snaps are going.
Jesus.
And on top of that, Mason Cole wasn't like very good at blocking either.
Yeah.
So like that would be like a 10, right? I would say we're not there, but we're above a 7, maybe at an 8, maybe 7.5. I don't know. But it's bad, right? So Blake Brandel, I think, is a reasonably good swing tackle. And they've moved him further inside every year. And he never, like before last year, he had never played center at any level, not in high school, not in college, not in the NFL. So he never really snapped the ball. So he was learning how to snap the ball. And you could tell, right? There were like a bunch of errant snaps, not in the first game, which I believe was against the Browns, which is like a crazy baptism at a new position. A game they won, by the way. Like with like very low pressure rate allowed. Like it was one of Miles.
Was that a Wentz? Was that a Wentz start?
It had to be, right? Yeah, it was a Wentz game. Yeah. High play action rate, low pressure rate, very unusual Browns game. But
yeah, just a Browns game.
Right? Yeah, it's just a Browns game. But like Myles Garrett couldn't get stuff done. Alex Wright couldn't get stuff done. We were like, what in the world? But yeah, so I would say after that, which was a real high watermark, it just kind of dropped off. We saw snap problems, we saw blocking problems, we saw communication problems. You can never really tell if pre-snap operational errors are because of the center or because of the quarterback. But both of them would have made sense here, right? But there were a lot of pre-snap operational errors, right? And I think that him being a new center played a significant role in that. And I just don't see him being a very good center. I'd love to be wrong about it, but like I had kind of penciled in that center would be an area where the Vikings would work to make a significant investment. And then they didn't, right? They grabbed Gavin Gerhardt in the 7th round or something like that. He's not very good. I mean, he's a 7th rounder. Like, even if I liked him a lot, I'd have to admit that he's probably not very good, right? They benched both Joe Huber and Michael Juergens, who are more natural centers and have a lot of experience playing center in college. So it looks pretty bad from that perspective. I don't know if there's like any kind of free agency options. Is Ethan Posick still floating around in free agency? That would be probably my go-to, but also it would be very funny to have Kyler once again line up behind a 6'5" center. That would be, I think, ideal for just laughs.
Well, Brendel's 6'7", isn't he?
Oh yeah. No, he's super tall. I was thinking of Caleb Tiernan.
So we're already gonna see.
It's just
which is like the whole Brendel problem is I can't recall a single 6'7" center. We've had more like tall guards in recent years, but I can't remember it.
Yeah. I mean, Froholt was kind of tall, so but like I don't know, man. I mean, like it doesn't matter as much as you might think it would, but it does matter. And it matters more not because of Kyler like not being able to see over the line, which is a genuine issue, but more because like he's not getting leverage at a spot you need a ton of leverage for. And there are some kind of taller players, 6'5", 6'4" players at center that know how to get low, that their body composition is such that their legs are a little bit shorter, their torso is a little bit taller. That happens, right? That allows you to get better leverage. But like this is not that example. Like I said, Brandel's a pretty good swing tackle. I don't know what the Vikings have been doing with this guy, but whatever.
It's also too bad that feels like Garrett Bradbury might be like the most reasonable target for them to go get, and I don't think the Bears are gonna like throw the Vikings a bone in that sense.
Yeah, both.
And that's another guy. Like, talk about like Minnesota fans like shit list. Like,
absolutely, kind of like on the on the line of like you're shooting targets, right? It's like, man, we've been trying
Yeah,
to get rid of this guy for years, and suddenly, like, what, are you kidding
he's
me?
your best option.
Yeah, it's it's bad, and like the Bears wouldn't want to give him up to help the Vikings, and then also like the Vikings, I think would like be embarrassed to ask, right? Like it's like
Right.
you break up with someone and then you call them like 3 years later. It's
Exactly.
like, hey man, you have like my record player.
Oh man. Oh, that's good. All right. Last quick question here. Over under is 8.5 this year. Where are you going, my friend?
I'm gonna go under.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't think Kyler's not like he hasn't been. I mean, the Cardinals are paying $30 million not to have him, right? And I think the Cardinals are wrong, right? I want to be like
They also
currently,
spent the 65th pick on, freaking Carson Beck. So I don't know if I'm trusting their judgment one
yeah,
way or
right. Like
another.
right now, they're being held to task by a Jacoby Brissett like hold in, right? Like that's
That's
down
where they
bad.
are.
That's real. I love Jacoby Brissett, but you cannot be in that position. So,
So I
and
think
like
we've voided your argument of
I'm just saying like if you
No, I
were
get it.
obviously good, even the Cardinals wouldn't do that, right? This is what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get across. But I think that like and his 2024 actually wasn't that bad. Like I want to be clear that I'm not just saying his last good year was 2021. His 2024 wasn't that bad. But I just don't think that there's a lot of synergy between what he does well and what the Vikings offense wants to do.
Yeah.
And not just what the Vikings offense has done over the past 3 years, but also what we might see from Frank Smith coming from Miami. Also stuff he doesn't do well.
Sure. Yeah, it is an
Um,
interesting mesh for sure.
yeah, and so I think that that's a problem. I think that I mean, he's just not playing up to the level that would allow the offense to. I always think about it in terms of solving problems, right? Like if you are in the fourth quarter and you need a touchdown with like 4 minutes left or whatever, Kyler's not that guy. Right. And I think
Mhm.
it's not like it's not that he doesn't have the guts, although I did call him a coward earlier in this. But it's more like you need to be so aware of all of the situational context, a problem that Kirk Cousins had actually until his final year with Kevin O'Connell. But you need to be aware of all the situational context, the down and distance, the time remaining, whether or not you can throw it over the middle of the field, whether or not you've got the ability to throw it to the outside, what level of risk you're willing to accept. In Aaron Rodgers' problem very early in his career, that he wasn't willing to accept risk. And so he's really bad at fourth quarter comebacks until he became godly at them later, right?
Mhm.
But like he had to recalibrate his risk in those situations. And Kyler, I don't think does that. I don't think he plays all that differently in the fourth quarter than he does in the first, which is, I think, a huge problem. So there's like a lot of issues offensively, and then defensively. I mean, I love Brian Flores, and it's almost really difficult for me to think of a Vikings offense or defense that can't produce a top five defense
Yeah.
with Brian Flores. But at the same time, it's like, well, Harrison Smith was gone. He was really important, right? They don't have a safety. I love Josh Metellus. He is like a dime back. He's an amazing
Right.
dime back. He's not like a safety. He's not up top, right? Um, I really like what they did at linebacker. It's also like the least important position for you to like make interesting moves. Like Blake Cashman, Jake Golday. Wow, that's gonna be really fun. And if Jake Golday is not ready yet, Eric Wilson, another Cincinnati. There's so many Cincinnati linebackers. Like Ivan Pace, right? But
That is
like
crazy.
Eric Wilson will get the job done. Like that's great. But like I like the flyer for James Pierre. I just don't. There's just not enough juice. I think at cornerback.
Yeah.
They moved. We don't know if Dallas Turner's any good. They moved Tyrion Ingram Dawkins to edge rusher because they have so many interior defenders now. I don't know if Caleb Banks will be ready to contribute right away. I love Dom Orange, but he is like a nose tackle. So like there's a lot defensively where it's like you can see where something would be good, but you have to add up all of these probabilities and like a lot has to go right. And I think the back end, the top of the defense just isn't there for how aggressively they play up front. So it's still going to be a good defense, but like, a below average offense and an above average defense, that to me is below 8.5, especially in the division.
Did you already watch my deep dive? I have them 11th on defense and 17th on offense.
Oh wow, look at that. That's great. I think a lot of times we have agreed with like I watched your deep dive back and I'm like, oh, all right, there's like 90% there. Sure.
Yeah. I'll take it. I'll take 90%. All right, this was fun as always. What's the next article we can look forward to on Wide Left?
So we do have Luke Braun breaking down a bunch of the motions and shifts from the Miami offense that Kevin O'Connell might bring over. He just broke down. We've got like a fun little data applet that allows you to like look at all the data Luke has gathered on what the Vikings had done last year with motions and shifts and what effect that's had on the running game, what effect that's had on the passing game, what effect it's had on the pre-snap process. So we're going to see what an introduction of a much more complicated system in that regard might do. So that's the next piece. I'm cooking up like a piece on like prediction markets and stuff like that, nice. And how they like impact our relationship to sports. And then after, I don't know, I'm just vibing, right? Like I've got like some investigative journalism coals in the fire, I guess. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know. Probably. Oh yeah, and we've got. I've got a guy working on is Jalen Hurts good? Great question. And
it's not me, by the way, guys. It's not me.
And another guy working on is Caleb Williams good, which is also I think a fun question.
Okay. Yeah, those will be good. All right, thank you everybody for watching. Thanks, Arif, as always. This was great.
And I love coming on, man. This rules.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much to Arif. It is always a genuine pleasure. Arif is one of the most talented people in the industry, just as a writer. Love listening to Arif talk ball as well. So it is truly a pleasure to get him on for the deep dive every year. I hope you guys enjoyed that. But we are not done. It is time to make some picks and predictions for the Vikings here. We'll start by looking at their schedule and their Vegas odds for the year here. And honestly, we've seen some pretty tough schedules in these recent deep dives. The Vikings get it relatively easy here, honestly. I like how things largely shake down for them. And it definitely helps that the NFC North, while this division is probably the most complete division, the Vikings are the last remaining fourth place team in a division to come in this series, if that makes sense. So you have some tough games interdivision for sure, but the fact that they get the NFC South and the AFC East, which to me are the definitive worst divisions in the NFL right now, that is a benefit to the Vikings and all of these NFC North teams. And then they get the like third place matchup in the other NFC divisions. So while, for example, the Packers and Bears have to play the Eagles, Cowboys, the Rams, Seahawks, for example, the Vikings get the Commanders and the Niners, which isn't a gimme, but I think everybody would rather play the Niners than both the Rams and the Seahawks, right? So really not the worst schedule here. I think that is definitely favorable for the Vikes. And even just by the math, I had that higher than their Vegas over-under. I actually think there's a lot of value on the Vikings over-under. I might be taking it myself as a fellow degenerate. My final prediction on the Vikings is 9 wins. I actually do think the defense maybe takes a slight step back this year. Hard to bet on that, right? With Brian Flores, that's really where the upside of a win ceiling of 11 wins come in. Like if you end up with a top 5 defense again and an offense that could also push top 10, like that could be easily a double-digit win team. So I do think the ceiling is there for them. And I think they have a really nice floor as well. I do. I mean, they had a disastrous season last year and they still ended up winning 9 games. So I have them as a 7-win floor and an 11-win ceiling. My prediction dropped right smack dab in the middle of that as a 9-win prediction. I did 9 wins for the Cowboys. So we're really getting into that territory of like playoff fringe. The NFC is crazy deep. It's probably going to take 9 to 10 wins to get there. I think the Vikings will realistically be right in it. So I think I am higher on this Vikings team in terms of my prediction. I'm higher than Arif. Arif took the under, right? I'm going over at 9 wins. And like, if I had to pick, do they win 11 games or do they win 7 games? If that had to be my bet, I think I would lean still towards the 11 over the 7. Like I do feel good about the Vikings this year. Maybe that bites me in the ass. But let's finish as well with some fun and pick some awards. And these are some of my favorite picks that we've done. Now, for team MVP, which is a non-quarterback award for me, I did go Justin Jefferson. I mean, come on. He's the best player on this team with a bullet. And I do think he's going to play really well with Kyler, kind of like we saw with DeAndre Hopkins. I'm big on what JJ is going to do. Biggest wild card to me is Christian Darrisaw. Dude's got to stay healthy. I know they've improved the floor with some other options at tackle here. And I do think, like Justin School and some of the other guys they've gone to has like derailed their pass protection when Darrisaw's gone down. I think they're in a better spot to at least survive. But Darrisaw is like the core reason that offensive line is still a top 10 unit for me. If you have to peel him back, you're immediately in the bottom 10 of the league, I think. So like he's a big swing for so much of what the Vikings can get going this season. Breakout offense. This was a tough one because a lot of the talent is already existing. I actually went with Kyler Murray as a breakout, kind of in the same way that like Sam Darnold broke out here, right? Like it's a second breakout for Kyler Murray in some ways, but it might be a breakout in the sense that he might just play the best quarterback for a full season that we've seen from Kyler Murray. But if you're going from, in my mind, my prediction is that I think Kyler goes from the 20th QB, and that's for me. I mean, public perception would put Kyler probably at like 25. If you go from that to like more of a consensus, like top 12 or even 14 quarterback, that is a breakout. So the more I thought about it, the easier that choice became for me. Breakout defense, very easy choice, but it is Dallas Turner. And I think that's a good stamp of like, I do believe in Dallas Turner taking a leap forward. He's been at times discussed as like a draft bust. He was always going to be a project. The expectations, like for him to be the defensive rookie of the year favorite, was always stupid. Like that just shows a poor understanding of how the Vikings were constructed. This is very similar to like year 3 Rashawn Gary in my mind, where he was behind the Smith brothers. They moved on from Zadarius Smith. And Rashawn Gary did break through in year 3. I think Dallas Turner is primed for a big breakthrough this year, and that would be huge for this defense, man. That probably is the biggest thing that needs to happen if this is going to be a top 5 defense again, because, Jonathan Grenard, super underrated. Big loss there. They got to fill those shoes. Unsung hero. I actually went with Blake Cashman here, and this maybe is recency bias because we just saw that top 10 ESPN linebackers article, and I don't remember seeing just a breath of Blake Cashman in that, even as an honorable mention. Dude, Blake Cashman's a top 10 linebacker in the NFL for me. And I think this defense is like noticeably different with and without him too. So like he needs more love, just league wide. Love me some Blake Cashman. This is my attempt to giving him some more love here. And then fantasy MVP, I'm going to go with Kyler Murray. Now, fantasy with his rushing production, he is QB 18, which is higher than maybe the real football perception of Kyler Murray. But I still think he exceeds that. I do. I think they're going to put up a lot of numbers here. I don't think the Vikings have a particularly good run game, and what run game they do have, I think he can be a part of it with some of that rushing production. So I think Kyler Murray finishes as a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year and will be well worth that draft pick. And he's the kind of guy too that, like, I always tell people, if you aren't playing in 2 quarterback leagues, I don't really want to talk fantasy with you. That's a non-starter for me. Like, go play in 2 QB leagues. Like, seriously. But if you are in a single quarterback league, Kyler Murray is the kind of guy that you would theoretically want to target, right? Like, you're looking in that QB 12 to 18 bucket of, what is that, like 8th, 9th round picks, and a guy that maybe could return the value of the same quarterbacks that get drafted in the early rounds. Like, Kyler Murray to me screams fantasy MVP this year. So ended up a pretty easy pick for me there. But there is your Vikings deep dive. Please do let me know in the comments down below what you think of the analysis here today. If you think I missed anything, what do you think of the 18th ranking for the Vikings? I've already seen some comments that people think this is too high from other deep dives. Do you maybe think this is too low? You think this team's going to be a Super Bowl team and shatter this 18th ranking? Let's hear it down below. Also, who do you think comes next in this series with the number 17 spot, which will mark the midway point with this deep dive series, which is also exciting. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button. If you did, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the remainder of this series. And that's all I got. Thanks for watching, and cheers.